Okay, thank you. Welcome and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee of Perth and Kinross Council of Wednesday, the 18th of September 2024. I'm Councillor Colin Stewart, convener of the committee. I'm joined by Alistair Bailey, the vice convener, by Miss Molly, the clerk to the committee, and by Lisa Simpson, who is our, going to get this right, strategic lead for legal and governance. Clark, do you want to do the roll call?
Thanks, convener. We have no formal apologies this morning, but I think a few members are joining us online. So when I call out your name, can you please confirm you're present? Councillor Forbes? Okay. Okay, I think Councillor Forbes is on his way. Councillor Frampton? And Councillor Massey?
Present.
Thank you. All other members are present in the chamber, convener.
Thank you. Sorry, just we have a quick point from Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I have to say I was rather shocked about the amount of items on the agenda today, many of which are, I would consider, very important reports. And given that, I was wondering if you're confident we can actually get through all this business and allow us to actually discuss and the various reports we've got in the time that we normally get allocated. It just seems as if we're trying to cram so much into so many important reports into a relatively short time, and I'm worried that we won't be able to do them all justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. You've kind of stolen what I was going to say. We have a busy agenda today. I will remind members and people answering questions just to keep their questions and answers as concise as possible, so full of detail, but in as few words as we can manage. We have just on at the end of the agenda, we have the written updates from the arm's length external organisation, so we're not going to be questioning the representatives today, and we have a couple of reports which if need be, we can hold over until the November meeting. Bailey's sort of taking the lead on those ones, but is happy that we can defer those if required. So I'm confident that we'll get done before finance and resources this afternoon. But thank you for your concern about our timekeeping. Do we have any declarations of interest in items on the agenda before us? Thanks. Okay, so just in the interest of transparency, as I am chair of the Integration Joint Board, and we have got the annual performance report at item 7 on the agenda, I'm going to declare a connection. It's not an interest which I consider requires me to remove myself from the room. Bailey, the vice convener, will lead the discussion on that point, but just to make clear for members that the annual performance report of the IJB is noted by the IJB, but is approved by the Audit and Performance Committee, which I don't sit on, just for transparency. Okay, item 3 on the agenda, if there's no other declarations of interest, is the minute of the meeting of Scrutiny and Performance Committee of 12th of June 2024 for approval. Can we agree the minute of the 12th of June? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda is the outstanding business statement. We have item 39, the weather events improvement plan. This is our ongoing investigation or ongoing consideration of the events of last year and the council's response to them. We had a recommendation initially that we, instead of having a winter plan, we have an all-year-round weather events response plan, and that went to the Climate Change and Sustainability Committee last month. And the next item was that we wanted to invite representatives of partner organisations along to to ask them about their role and future plans, and we've got that on the agenda obviously next today. And then item 40 was a report on the schedule of gully cleaning, and that was considered again at the Economy and Infrastructure Committee last month. And the extreme weather events we had. Well, we'll come on to that. Item 41 is also completed. So can we remove the completed items from the outstanding business statement? Agreed. Great. I just wanted to quickly hand over to the Vice Convener.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So there was a expectation set that we would bring a report about the scrutiny review into additional support needs provision and allocations to this meeting, but because of the agenda congestion that was already discussed, we made a decision to move that to November. The advantage of moving it to November is that it will give an opportunity for myself, Councillor Stewart and Councillor Shires to visit some ASN settings to get a better idea and sort of dig a bit deeper on that ahead of a report coming in November. So it's not mentioned on the action log, but I just wanted to help you rest assured that the topic of ASN is not forgotten. There's still work going on in the background, and there will be a report to the November meeting. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Item 5 on the agenda is a presentation from external organisations on their role in incident preparedness, response and recovery. I know that members were keen to hear from the partner organisations, SEPA, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, Scottish Water and SSE as well. So I'm very pleased to say that we've been able to arrange to have all of 3 of those partner organisations come along today. From SEPA, we have Alex Flucker and Vincent Fitzsimmons. From Scottish Water, we have Gavin Steele and Peter Farrer. And from SSE, we have Paul Owen and James Maxton. What we're going to do for each of those organisations, we're going to invite them to come up to the top table here and go through a few slides. We've taken the opportunity over the past month or so just to have an initial discussion to brief some members who were able on the role of each of the organisations in terms of response to severe weather events and their relationship with the council. But we've got we also took the opportunity just to ask them, line up some questions that we wanted to ask them. So we've some of that detail will be included in the slide presentations. We'll then ask each organisation some questions, and then we can, after all have presented, they can return, and we'll have a general Q&A that on any general issues that members might have. So first up, can I invite the representatives of SEPA, Alex Flucker and Vincent Fitzsimmons to come up, please? Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time and the obviously the pre-discussions that we've had over the last month or so. But I'll just hand over to you. You understand about the microphones. I'll hand over to you so that you can take us through your presentation for SEPA and the role in flooding and the preparedness response and any future plans. If you, I'll just hand over.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. Thank you for having us. I'm Alex Flucker, Chief Operating Officer for Data, Evidence and Innovation at Scottish Environment Protection Agency. I'll give you an overview of our general responsibilities, how they relate specifically to the work that we do with regards to flooding, and some of the activities we've taken forward over the course of the last 12 months or so in support with Perth Kinross Council with regards to their flooding operations. So on our next slide, you will see we have a broad range of responsibilities with respect to protecting Scotland's environment and its people, both now and for future generations. We have a specific role with regards to flooding, which relates to providing warnings to business and communities for potential harm and risks of flooding. If I just unpack a little bit further around our roles and responsibilities, which you'll see on the next slide with regards to flooding, how it relates to other organisations. In SEPA, our principal role is around gathering evidence and making that available, and we do that through the provision of flood maps, which we make available and accessible on our websites. Those are reviewed on a frequent basis. We provide flood forecasts, alerts and warnings, and we provide those in partnership with the Met Office, which is obviously the UK's primary climate authority. And we used to have a statutory role in response to planning consultations with respect to flooding. There's some nuances in that which I'll touch on. We oversee those roles through 14 regions across Scotland, where we develop flood risk management plans and make advices to local authorities that are within those regions with respect to establishing local flood risk management plans. And then for local authorities, their responsibility is to design, develop, operate and maintain those flood risk defences and schemes that are in place, and doing that in collaboration with SEPA with respect to the advice and the warnings and alerts that we publish. There's another role obviously with local authority with respect to planning decisions. Local authorities make decisions on planning subject to some of the advice they may receive from different partners. SEPA obviously, as I said before, providing advice with respect to flooding. Scottish Water College can speak to their roles and responsibilities, but you see a summary headline there with respect to that. If I move forward onto the next slide with respect to how we deliver those flood forecasts and warnings, the headlines here is that forecasts happen days ahead of a potential flooding event. Warnings happen hours ahead of a potential flooding event. How we provide those flood forecasts, we have a standing product that we issue every single day at 10:30 in the morning, and that gives us a rolling 5-day forecast and provides a regional assessment of the flood risk to any of those 14 flood risk regions across Scotland. And those are communicated through a range of channels to key partners that we work with operationally, local authorities, blue light agencies, communities, and we provide those through a range of forums that target the information to reach those stakeholders in the right way. If I move on to flood warnings happen, as I said earlier, hours in advance of any potential flooding event, and we continually monitor any potential escalation of floods and issue warnings between 3 and 6 hours in advance of a flood reaching a particular community based on the operational agreements that we have in place for those particular areas. We provide warnings at 3 levels, yellow, amber and red. Amber warnings give an indication that severe flooding is likely to happen or possible to happen. Red warnings naturally saying that severe flood warning is likely is due to be taking place imminently. Again, those communications are issued in a targeted way through a range of channels to our stakeholders, communities on the ground through our floodline service, where people can receive notifications and texts on their phone that are bespoke to the location in which they're registered. To local authorities, blue light agencies and our fellow Category 1 partners and organisations, so that they can respond adequately. And we provide that service 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I'll give you an overview of the support and the collaboration we've had with Perth and Kinross Council over the last 12 months. So on the next slide, you'll see a summary of this. Naturally, Perth and Kinross Council and the operators that deliver your flood protection schemes have sought to review the arrangements that they have in place. We provided advice, as is our advisory role in that space, in a very collaborative fashion. There's been some change on the ground with the people that deliver that service in Perth and Kinross Council. We've offered training and support and workshops over the course of the year through a series of different events. I know, and this year I mentioned earlier that we will frequently review and assess the vulnerability or the communities that are potentially at risk of flooding. We completed a planned consultation on those potentially vulnerable areas, which gives us a baseline and a refreshed understanding of the risk to communities in Scotland. It's one of the tools that we use and allows us to consider whether there's a need to either open new flood protection schemes across Scotland or change the approaches to those that exist. That's the summary for our presentation now. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Have we got any questions from members? Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. Communications. We know in this modern world, everything is done by social media, etc., etc. What if everything failed? Should towns, for instance, go back to the old days where we have an actual siren to say, look, there's a real problem coming? It seems daft, but thank you.
Might have two respondents on this one from SEPA. I guess the principle is that how we develop and deliver our communications work is through sustainable, resilient approaches that are safeguarded to any potential, impact that might change the reliability of those. So we have fallback measures and different tools which you use, be it direct communications through secure hubs with Resilient Scotland for flood risk management partners, telephone calls that we have with operators, our website, and other kind of social media measures. So the range that we have is broad. There are fallbacks, and we have secure, resilient principles embedded in the design and delivery of those. I think if we move to a siren, that's probably a local decision for communities and for Perth and Cumross to consider. That's not necessarily something that SEPA would step into.
It's just when you've just seen the news recently abroad and you've seen the Poland, etc., flooded. I just wonder when you see that people lose their lives, etc., how much warning did they really get? I mean, what the point I'm getting to is that if everything goes down, and it's possible it can go down because it's a storm and everything goes down, old people can't use their mobile phone, they don't have it, is that it probably is a local thing, but you've got to think, I think, of the whole of the country. And maybe suggestions would be that we come up with some other idea that warn people of immediate danger because it can cost lives. Thank you.
So we're very mindful of that. There's the science behind the forecasts. That's very important, but those forecasts are useless unless people hear them. So we're extremely mindful of the various communication methods that are necessary, and we review how those communications went after every flood event, and in fact after every big flood event that happens around the world. Romania this week, Germany a few years ago, Brisbane in Australia. So we're extremely mindful of the necessity for communication and how that works. We've been tested over the last few years. If you think about COVID and lockdown, SEPA was subject to a significant cyber attack recently, and our communications kept going through all of those without missing a beat.
I was on holiday in America quite a few years ago, and there was an warning for a hurricane coming through or something like that, and totally unexpected. The TV started going crazy, shouting aware. It was incredible, and that was a communication I thought was absolutely the way to go, to let people know through the television.
Absolutely, and we keep an eye on all the latest technologies. That those emergency alerts that go straight out like that are a new technology that's coming out. We're looking at that at a UK level and how those could be applied in Scotland.
Thank you. Vice Convener.
Thank you for the presentation and thank you for coming along today. I appreciated the mention of the fact that Invergowrie will receive some attention with regard to updating the flood forecast and the flood mapping there. In brief, is any more known about the root causes of the flood event in Invergowrie? Was it indeed down to the failure of a specific burn higher upstream, or do we think Invergowrie might be a place that now will suffer more regular flooding? Thank you.
So SEPA Scotland's Strategic Flood Risk Management Authority and we assess every at-risk. We assess the communities that are at risk on a statutory 6-year cycle. Invergary is one of those that's been identified as at risk of it clearly. So we work through with Invergary like we work through with every community, assessing the risk, and then working with the local authority to understand the cause of that risk and the actions that can be taken. That's what we've done at Invergary. We've worked with Perth and Kinross Council. We've attended community meetings about it this April. SEPA specific actions there are also considered, and we work through those.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. Alex and Vincent, last year we had a real disaster in October and there was lots of finger pointing afterwards. Do you feel that your own communication systems are robust enough, and have you reviewed them since last October? Thank you.
Two-part response. I'll give a headline before handing over to Vincent some of the detail. We are confident. We provide our flood risk management services, our warnings and forecasts 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We provided advice before, during and after any potential and actual flood events. We continually, as a matter of course, review our procedures, processes, systems, tools, our skills, and that is ongoing. As a matter of course, I think we're confident that how we operated in the events of October last year were correct. We delivered our duties, we delivered those well, and we'll continue to do that.
Thanks. Maybe. Thank you. Maybe if I could just follow up quickly on Councillor Allen's question there. Do you maybe just want, while you're here, and I don't know how many people are tuned in watching this live, but just as a matter of sort of record, to explain for public understanding just how the sort of monitoring points and the exchange of information between SSE and the council further down the water catchment or the river catchment area works, just if you wanted to take an opportunity on that.
So certainly, just to go back a step, just to explain a little bit of the background, as you heard from Alex, we work on 2 scales: at a regional scale, days ahead, to indicate if flooding is possible to help people prepare, and then we operate on a more local scale, hours ahead, to indicate if flooding is imminent. So what we're talking about here is that second, more local scale to assess if flooding is imminent. SEPA operates a flood warning scheme for Perth city centre, and it issues warnings for 2 particular places, one of which are the basement properties. So those properties are at risk when the river flows are high from a different source of flooding than is normal. It's an unusual source of flooding. It's from under the ground. The water comes up into the basements. So that source of flooding is not something that the floodgates can protect. So for that reason, SEPA issues those particular warnings for those particular properties, because they can flood even when the flood scheme is in full operation. So it issues warnings for those basements, and then in addition, it provides a particular service for Perth Council, which is we provide indications if the flows at Perth are going to be greater than 800 metres cubed a second. That's a particular protocol that's been worked out with Perth. So whether it's issuing those warnings for the basement properties or whether it's giving that indication on what the flows are, that's done via monitoring locations. Days ahead, we make predictions. Hours ahead, what we're doing is we're basing that on the monitoring information that we're seeing in front of us, because that's about whether flooding is imminent. So there are a number of monitoring locations upstream of Perth across the various different rivers that flow into the Tay and then past Perth. You think about Glen Lyon, you think about the River Garry, the Isla, they all end up, that water all ends up funneled past Perth. So SEPA has a number of monitoring locations upstream, and there are several that have been picked as representative of what the flows will be in Perth in a few hours' time. So those locations then are monitored very closely 24/7 through a flood, and the locations, the flows at each of those locations are added up. And if those numbers exceed 800 meters cubed a second, then the protocol is we inform the council that those flows are going to reach Perth in a few hours' time. So that's how it works. The information from SSE is fed in as part of that, and they're included in CEPA's calculations, and those numbers then that come to people on call in Perth Council.
Thanks very much. Councillor Smith, you've got another question, but I'm going to take Councillor Welch first, seeing as you've not had one yet.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for the brief presentation here and the work you've done in the subsequent time since the incident in Perth. I guess two critical elements are understanding the data and communicating the data. I guess my first question is, in terms of understanding the data, are you confident that you understand the data? Is there data that's not in your control that you need to develop and have better clarity on? And in terms of technology that may help you process this data to give clarity maybe earlier and provide an earlier warning if on the basis of that would be desirable to aid the communication piece. Are there any steps you're taking to do that?
Just probably reflecting on Vincent's comments. So the locations where we have hydrometry gauges across the catchment area in the various rivers are strategically chosen to be located at points where rivers meet together. We have to work with the land as it exists and the rivers that exist. The time it takes for water to pass those gauges and to reach Perth City is set. That's the laws of physics. In terms of how we can, use the information that's available, we have to draw upon the data which we receive dynamically. It comes through kind of over-the-air updates into very sophisticated software, and we have people with very sophisticated skills in hydrology to assess and understand that data, and it's understood well. The broader point around the kind of the timing of the information that comes through, we could select data points that are further upstream, further up catchment, but the risk you have there is that we would catch a less fuller picture of the totality of water flows that are potentially coming into Perth City. And so the primary, most strategic points that we select are the ones that give us the most accurate understanding. I think that's the principal point. I don't know, Vincent, if there's any kind of additional points you may want to make on the communication piece and kind of opportunities around that and how we might kind of digest that information.
Oh, I think you've covered it, Alex. A couple of things just to add. We work on those timescales of hours ahead, but we also work days ahead to indicate to local authorities if we think severe flooding is possible, and we indicate that every day by email. And in fact, during a big flood, we indicate it twice a day. So we work on those two scales. Several days ahead, is severe flooding possible? And then several hours ahead, is it imminent? What is actually happening in our monitoring information? And then, as with the previous answer, we review after every flood how we're doing, and we review the latest technology. So CEPA's, for example, just launched a satellite monitoring service to help us understand wildfires, floods, and various other emergency events. So we're constantly reviewing what the latest technology is out there, and when something can be used more effectively, then we adopt it. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for those answers. So ultimately, we're in a dynamic situation here, and with climate change, it's these, if you like, unexpected becoming more expected. Weather anomalies are going to become more frequent. You obviously have significant amount of historic data from the work that you've done in the past, and can you explain to me what modelling you do to capture all that historic data in order that helps you inform, in essence, how to make that modelling more accurate? My understanding is it's Tay catchment's one of the largest in the UK, and the peak flow of the Tay is the largest in the UK. And ultimately, I think it's going to be increasingly clear that rather than building at public expense bigger and bigger walls, ultimately at the lower end of the catchment, we need to be actively intervening in land management to effectively hold that water back in the future. I'm very interested the work that you're playing in that area, both modelling and future proofing effectively the catchment to stop essentially the terrible consequences of flooding. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of elements to that question. I'll speak around our broader work across kind of partners to tackle catchment and land use practices, and maybe Vincent, you can maybe speak to the piece on modelling and forecasting predictions for climate change. So you're absolutely right. Climate change is increasing. It's very much felt here and now. We work with Scottish Government and other partners and agencies and public bodies to understand more about that and to inform our work, but also to work with Scottish Government around policy and in the execution of policy. Your comment around land use practices is very, very real. There's a Scottish Government recently consulted on a water resilience strategy that closed just earlier last month, the month before. In that, they're calling out some of the things you've just mentioned, where hard infrastructure and engineered solutions have a limitation. And across a catchment, it's more important to look across the full catchment, to look at land use practices, to look at maybe the straighting of burns or straighting of rivers, or the farming practices that happen right up to the margins of rivers. Those are responsibilities largely for other bodies, and we work with those partners. And there's very much a kind of an understanding of a need to shift that practice that happens across different stakeholders who impact the water resilience in catchments across Scotland. So yeah, that's very much a live piece of work, and we work very closely with partners in Scottish Government on that. I'll hand over to Vincent to speak around the modelling and forecasting, unless you have a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you for that. And specifically, it would be useful for us as a council to understand where we can play our part through planning, potentially, and engagement with communities and businesses within Perth and Kinross as part of that. But thank you for that, and understand the modelling would be good. Thank you.
Yes, so there is a long, as you say, record of river flows in the Tay catchment, and again, routinely after every flood, we review the communications and we review the quality of our predictions, and we use that information to then reassess how those models are performing, how the communication is performing, and to reevaluate and upgrade those models. And there's a program of upgrades that we've developed in order to kind of make that happen.
Thank you.
Thanks. And maybe just to quickly follow up on Councillor Welsh's first question, that exchange of data in terms of the monitoring of the cubic meters per second of the Tay through Perth, but that exchange of data with the council happens in real time. It's not just a forward warning. When it's happening, there's also a real time exchange of data. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Thanks. Just wanted to get that clear. Councillor Smith, you've got another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think my question was partly answered there, but what I'm concerned about, and it's been a bone of contention with me, is that in the outlying areas that are suffering flooding, which have never flooded before, and it's happened in my locality, which they could say it's never happened in 100 years. I want to know how SEPA and all the other organisations look at it, in a sense that over the decades, people built ditches for a reason. They built areas to hold back water. The neglect in these is just ridiculous. And as soon as we get even a shower rain nowadays, the water cascades down into villages, etc. I have always had the feeling that, and people said to me, you won't be able to do that because SEPA will object to it. SEPA will object to everything. Now, that's something I think you've got to go over, but I think you've got to realise that we are climate change. We have to make sure that all these waterways, etc., are cleaned, are looked up to the standard. And I just can't understand why it's not a #1 priority. Because if we can keep it back, we can help. So I'd like to know, why has it not been top of the list? Why is cleaning of areas that are suspect of flooding not been done? Thank you.
So no authorization is required to clear field drains or ditches by SEPA. Litter debris, stream vegetation, that can be removed without authorization.
Can go to farmers and say, look, this village has been flooded out because you've not looked after the environment, and that is your job to look after the environment. So why haven't you put some enforcement in? Thank you.
I think this comes to the point where we answered a question from one of your colleagues in the council. This is around working closely with partners and bodies and stakeholder groups to educate how land use practices can change, how working with nature rather than using traditional techniques can bring broader benefits beyond just the immediate benefits that some land use practitioners might use. That's something we do regularly, collaboratively, with a range of partners, with National Farming Union Scotland, with Nature Scot, Scottish Government, and you see again to the kind of comments I made earlier, there's an emerging change coming through in that space. So if you have a look at some of the kind of the narrative from the Scottish Government and their flood risk resilience consultation, the principles around nature-based solutions, blue-green infrastructure are right across that potential strategy, and that's the travel direction. That's certainly the work that we're trying to take forward on the ground, and we'll continue to do that. But it is important to just really get across a change in practice across catchments, and working more with nature to have broader benefits, environmental benefits, will be probably one of the kind of primary things to focus on.
Thanks. If I could just again follow up, because this was actually the question I was going to ask, was just in terms of you were talking there about there's being no permissions required for field drain clearance. Maybe just something around the burn clearance, so things like either clearing permissions that might be required for clearing sediment or for vegetation overgrowth. Alyth is in my ward, and obviously occasionally suffers from quite severe flooding. One of the things that local people think is that if the sediment was cleared, but there's a perception around it being very difficult to get permission for doing works in burns as opposed to the field drains and so on. So I wondered if you wanted to speak about that.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Again, I think it's founded in Vincent's answer around general binding rules. So in the permissions that SEPA have in place, there are risk-based permissions that exist, and under general binding rules, drainage ditches, and I believe burns can be cleared without any permission required from SEPA. That can be taken forward. But again, if there's a build-up of silt and soil in burns, that's really an indicator that further upstream, the underlying land use management practices probably are not contributing well to the overarching water resilience of the broader system. So again, to the previous principal points, there's a need to work with all land use practitioners and across the catchment to bring about those broader benefits.
Okay, thanks. And then one other thing that occurred to me when I was watching the flooding happen last year was that a lot of communities were reporting, I think just as Councillor Smith was talking about there, a lot of communities were reporting that they were seeing more flooding and flooding in places that had never flooded before. So both an increase in the volume of flooding in established areas, but also new flooding. You were talking about the sort of flood risk maps at the start of your presentation. I wondered how you were taking account of public observations of new areas of flooding and greater flooding than in previous year.
We speak on just that maybe some of the points around new areas of flooding, and I'll invite Vincent to speak around how we kind of start to understand those concerns from communities, which probably relates to our recent consultation. So new areas of flooding, this comes through for quite likely a couple of drivers. The first being climate change, more water, more frequent water, rainfall, heavy rainfall landing on land that's already saturated. And so there isn't a capacity within the soil to absorb any further water. That can exacerbate or bring about flooding in areas that hadn't previously experienced it. The other piece is around development, where you have development taking forward into areas that are maybe historically natural floodplains, but through the planning process have been kind of engineered to withstand a certain degree of rainfall. And that's really around kind of surface water flooding, and the efficacy of the broader design of that development. And you see that across the country, and not just in Scotland. That's a common issue. So those are probably the two main drivers: climate change, and not newer kind of development into areas that are historically natural floodplains. But I'll let Vincent speak about that piece that you raised around learning from communities about their experience.
So CEPRA's Scotland's Flood Risk Management Authority it has two main responsibilities assigned to it. One is the forecasting piece, and one is the strategic flood risk management role. And as part of that, it assesses the hazard from flooding and the risk, and then actions to address those on a kind of strategy 6-yearly cycle. So as the information on climate change comes through, as information on impacts in every recent flood comes through, those risk assessments are updated, and that's taken into account. As part of that, we do a public consultation at various stages through that 6-yearly cycle, and we've just completed one on this summer, taking on views on and observations on where it has flooded and the difference that makes to the risk. So we take on those views through those public consultations. And there's also a facility called Report a Flood, which people can give information live on floods that are happening right now, and we take in that information and use that again as part of our updated risk.
Thanks very much. I think it'd be important to flag up that Report a Flood facility for the public, but thanks very much for that. I'm not seeing any further questions for SEPA in the chat, so thank you very much, Alex and Vincent. Could I ask you now to swap with Gavin Steele and Peter Farrer from Scottish Water next? If we queue up their presentation next, just take a moment. Thanks very much. I'm just going to hand over. Yep, we've got your presentation on screen. I'm just going to hand over straight to you and allow you to introduce it yourselves.
Thank you, convener. Thank you for inviting us here today. I'm going to try to be brief in my remarks, but I'd be pleased to take any questions, obviously, afterwards from any members. My name's Peter Farrer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Scottish Water, and Gavin Steele here is in our corporate communications affairs team. In my role, I'm responsible for teams, if we can move to the next slide, responsible for teams all over Scotland that deliver the essential services that Scottish Water provides, supplying high quality drinking water to our customers every day and taking away wastewater so that it can be cleaned and safely returned to the environment. This graphic here just represents the scope and the scale of the activities that we carry out and the level of infrastructure that we have across Scotland. Also, the level of investment that we're currently doing to upgrade that infrastructure. You'll see there £1.07 billion of investment in the last 12 months of Scottish Water. So there's a huge amount of investment going on to upgrade what we call ageing assets. And also, some of that investment is also to deal with some of the topics that we've been speaking to today, which is the changing climate. So, as you'll have seen, SEPA and the council officers have already discussed their role in relation to flooding for you. So I'm going to focus on Scottish Water's responsibilities in this part. In simplest terms, Scottish Water is responsible for the operation of the public sewer network. These receive water from customers that they use in their homes to wash, prepare food, flush toilets, but they also receive some rainwater that falls on communities, draining rooftops and paved areas within individual properties and gardens. The majority of road gullies in established urban areas are also connected to Scottish Water sewers, and the only area where we do not have combined, so these are called combined sewers, the only area where that is not combined is in modern developments. In all modern developments, we make sure there is a separate system and there is a separate route for surface water to go back to the environment without coming into a combined sewer. The link between rainfall, council maintained road gullies and Scottish Water sewers is complex. And understanding flooding when it occurs, but there's also other interactions. So and we've talked about these just a minute ago with SEPA, all natural and man-made drainage systems, including rivers, culverted watercourses, overland flows of stormwater and tides, all interact and do so with different types of weather events that we've been having. When it comes to making the right choices for the long term, there has been important collaborative work done between Scottish Water and the council in the years before the pandemic to produce a piece of work that we call Integrated Catchment Study for Perth. This was a huge and complex undertaking, but it provides a much improved understanding of the systems and the interactions in Perth. And it's playing a key role in our continuing work together to find and test options to manage flood risk better. Before I move on from roles and responsibilities, I should also note that there's also a specific arrangement that we have with Perth, where my operational team operates a pumping station at South Inch on the council's behalf, which is part of the city's flood defences. When called upon, it's critical that that pumping station can work at full capacity, sometimes for extended periods, and there has been a lot of work and strong collaboration with the council recently to make sure that the pumping station is operating at its absolute best to deal with any events that happen, and that is the case. I want to say a little bit about how my team prepares for and responds to specific episodes of severe weather. So we monitor weather events closely, and we work really hard to prepare our own resources and the resources of our supply chain partners to respond during these incidents. And in essence, we have different response levels for yellow, amber and red warnings. The primary route for engagement at big events with local authorities is through our respective emergency planning teams, and there are good relationships there. And there's also escalation to the wider multi-agency response via the local resilience partnerships. With the scale of challenge and many severe weather events that we're seeing and the workload of the agencies responding, it's important that there are clear structures for operational communication, and we're keen to play our full part with the regional partnerships. And when the tier 1 partners stand them up, we will always be there to support. We also provide national updates to the Scottish Government Resilience Room when that is activated. Turning very briefly to the weather event between 6th and 8th of October last year, we prepared in response to the warnings that were in place. And while important mitigations were put in place to protect, and a lot of cases in storm conditions, it impacts on the water supply. So we put a lot of proactive measures in place, but we also do that for flooding events also. And during that particular event, we had 856 cases raised through our customer engagement centre over a 48-hour period, and around 70% of those were to do with sewer blockages. So when flooding comes, debris in the sewers flushed out through extreme rainfall can cause blockages. And that happens all over the country. So we have a team of people who are out there dealing with, in this case, 602 blockages over that period, where normally we would expect to see about 30 a day. So a significant amount of activity for us. Our Intelligent Control Centre, which links up all of our many thousands of assets across the country, took 7,000 alarms in this period, alerting us to impacts and issues across all of our operational sites, including flooding hotspots that we have. So we have a number of flooding hotspots about the country. We have monitoring in the sewers, which alert us to when the sewers start to rise. And on that, we can't stop the rainfall, we can't stop the flooding from happening, but we can get our people out there to support customers. We put tankers out, we go out and help local councils with flood defences, etc. So a possible, in terms of flood investigations, when there are flooding issues affecting our customers, we carry out flood investigations. And if that investigation flags up that there are customers' properties at risk of flooding, and that flooding is happening within what we would call a normal design envelope, then we would put them on our high risk register, and that then means that we would help them with flood protection for their properties, but also we would look at what a long-term solution would be in terms of upgrading sewers. If you can move on. So on this graphic here, you'll see this is the strategic scheme that we're currently doing for Perth. This is a huge scheme. It involves a new trunk sewer, a new pumping station to deal with the growth in the northwest, as you can see there, but also upgrading of the existing sewer, particularly along Tay Street, and a significant upgrade to our treatment works at Perth. There's £100 million of investment going in there to enable growth in Perth. but also one of the added benefits, you'll see there's 5 flood hotspots that are shown on that there in the circles. By upgrading the sewer along Tay Street, it will effectively deal with those 5 flood hotspots shown on the map there. The main activity that you'll see down in Tay Street is supersizing of a sewer. It's 548 metres of sewer, and it's being upgraded to 2.2 metres in diameter, as I said, to assist with the growth areas, but also to take away or reduce the risk of flooding from the 5 hotspot areas. Okay, if you move on to the next slide. There's also, I wanted to touch on Bell Sports Centre, as I know that some members were keen to understand the particular situation here. This is one of the known areas of incapacity that we have in our sewer network. It will benefit from the additional storm capacity that we're building down at Tay Street. But as is typical in these cases, there needs to be local infrastructure changes as well. In this particular case, there's £2 million worth of investment that we have on currently in a project which is moving forward. You'll see on the right-hand side there, effectively will be removing the connections from all the gullies around there and putting in flood attenuation to make sure that that is not inundating the sewer and causing flooding. So, in conclusion, I hope I've been able to give an overview of Scottish Water's role in relation to drainage and flooding, how we prepare and respond to severe weather events, and the investment that we're making, particularly in Perth, supported by the partnership that we have with Perth Council. We're committed to engaging openly and learning because we all recognise that we're seeing far more regular weather events being raised already and at every level of government and across all public agencies and with communities and customers too. We have to engage and communicate a lot more going forward. So really that's all I wanted to say, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the presentation. That's very helpful. Councillor Robertson, you're up first.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for your going through the slides with us. I think it's been very helpful. You mentioned that there's one of the big problems is the combined sewers that we have throughout Perth and Kinross and the problems that causes. I've also identified flooding hotspots. When you've got areas that are flooding hotspots and also areas where the combined sewer causes environmental damage, like, for example, Loch Leven, have you got a programme going forward to try and divert water falling on the roads from going into the sewers? Is that in flooding hotspots in areas where that system is causing environmental damage?
You said specifically, just so I can understand, removing gullies, did you say? From
the problem is that when you get areas where there's flooding problem, if the water from the roads goes into the sewer, it overwhelms your sewerage network. And I'm asking if in flooding hotspots, if you've got an ongoing programme to divert that surface water from going into sewers.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and the answer to that is yes. So in any flooding hotspots, we carry out studies. They involve pretty complex hydraulic modelling of all of the interactions, which includes the household sewerage plus road gullies plus water courses, culverts, all point sources that can impact on it. And what we do, working closely with the council and other partners, is we look at what is the best way to mitigate any impact. And that doesn't, sometimes upgrading a sewer and a capital investment project is the right thing to do, but other times it will be about potentially removing surface water, which is currently in the system. And we're looking at a lot of blue-green infrastructure to see what we can do to take surface water, potentially in areas that are not near the flooding hotspot, but take it out so that it actually helps in that particular area. So we work very closely, as I said, with the partners to work out what is the collective best way that we can alleviate flooding or overflows.
A quick follow-up. Can you give an example of where that's actually happened? For example, there's bits of Perth, as you'll know, that in the higher areas of Perth, the water flows from there down into the centre of Perth, which causes serious issues.
I'm not familiar. Gavin might.
So I don't think we have an example, Councillor Robertson, where that's already happened. There is quite active discussion in relation to one of the flooding hotspots on the west side of the city, I think, where there's a sort of school where potentially surface water management measures could be part of the solution. So we're very interested in discussing that with the council and seeing whether we can make it work. There's a slightly larger scale example that's working its way through in suburban Dundee at the moment, where we're working with the council there to see if a watercourse that's been culverted through a green space can be brought back to the surface, and SEPA and Nature Scot are involved in that project too, in order to manage surface water better within a park. I suppose that slightly makes the point, which is true of all of these blue-green infrastructure discussions, that there does need to be space for the water to be stored inland instead of going down into the combined sewer, which I shall appreciate is challenging in some urban areas.
Thank you. Councillor Carr next.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and good to see the investment getting done in Perth City. But there are lots of other communities in and around Perth and Kinross, and regularly I come across issues of flooding, and the answer to that is that it's a capacity issue, and then it seems that nothing further can be done about it. Can you give some details with regards to capacity issues and then how these may be addressed moving forward?
Okay, so the key thing about the sewer system is, and this is the same across the whole of the water industry, that sewers are designed to take a certain return period of storm, and it's generally a 1 in 30-year storm. Okay, so what we're seeing, and we've been talking about it this morning, is extreme rainfall patterns that are getting worse. So clearly, when we experience extreme rainfall, the sewers are not designed to deal with that level of rainfall, and then they become overwhelmed, obviously, because there's only a definite amount of capacity within the sewers. But what we always do when there is a flood event, we will do a hydraulic model of that. We'll do a really detailed investigation to identify, is the sewer working exactly how it was designed? So if it happened to be less than a 1 in 30 return period storm, then clearly there would be an issue, and we would look at upgrading the sewer to deal with that, and that would then go into our capital programme. But if the storm is significantly above that, then there's nothing that we do with that, because we cannot keep upgrading sewers. As you can imagine, all the streets, we've got 50,000 kilometres of sewers across Scotland, and that we cannot continue to just upgrade them to deal with the storm patterns. It's far more effective, as we've been talking about, to try and take some of the surface water out of a combined sewer, rather than the disruption and the cost of upgrading sewers. Take the surface water out where we can, and allow the combined systems to work in the way that they were supposed to work. Sorry.
Thank you. Next up, the question is Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Peter, for your presentation. It was good, and there was a lot of information in there that was good to see. Councillor Carr, I think, kind of alluded to it prior to me coming in here, but in my ward, we've got some places that flood regularly. If I use Mouthall as an example, Mouthall's on a hill. It starts at the top of a hill, and at the bottom of that hill, there's regular mass flooding. Do we look at places like Mouthall with regards to drainage, water and sewerage, and what we can do to improve places like that? Or do we just concentrate mainly on places like Perth, Dundee, Edinburgh, etc.?
I'm not sure if Gavin knows anything specific about Mouthall. I don't have any specifics, but just as a general response, if it's to do with flooding from sewers, we'll look at every community. So property in Mouthall is just as important as a property in Perth or in Edinburgh or Glasgow. So we look at all properties in exactly the same way.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with you afterwards, Councillor Allen, if that's helpful, but I'm not aware of anything specifically in Mouthall, but certainly, you know, by way of example, at risk of straying into other wards besides, you know, a flooding project was delivered in Crieff very recently, resolving a flooding hotspot in Crieff, and that will be true in other communities across Perth. I guess just coming back to Peter's point, where we are challenged, and I know the council's roads teams are challenged too, is where the topography of the landscape
I think it was probably on your second slide it suggested, and I might have got it wrong because I wrote the numbers down after the slide had gone, but you provide 1.47 billion litres of water per year. But from that, there's only 1.07 billion waters of waste. What happens to the other 400?
$1.49 billion litres of water produced and 1.07 billion of wastewater treated daily. Yeah, Gavin. Yeah.
So, I mean, there'll be a number of factors in it, Councillor Allen, but the biggest one I think will be that there are a much higher number of properties in particularly rural Scotland that are privately drained. So their flows of wastewater don't come into our sewer, but for the majority of those houses, we're providing them with drinking water. So that creates a big part of the difference, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Shires, you've got a couple.
Thank you, Convener. And the risk of being parochial like my colleagues in Blairgowrie, where again it's businesses at the bottom of the hill that are most affected. But I would like to a couple of points. Firstly, on the positive, Kieran Johnston in your corporate affairs team is my go-to person every time I've got an issue, and he is fantastic. And I think that connection between the organisation and community and councillors is really helpful actually when there's a problem, to have a name that you can make contact with. And I think going back to big events like the one in Perth, I think that having the person that you've got their contact details with is a model that we appreciate anyway, and probably take some of the break some of the log jam in the information. That means that we can then go back to community councils, etc., with that straight from the horse's mouth information, which I personally find really helpful, and I'm sure colleagues maybe who don't have Kieran's number might like it. My two questions. The first one was about you referred to the high risk register, and it was an understanding of how many people across Perth and Kinross are classed as being on that, and whether that is reviewed on a regular basis. And going back to my parochial bit, if I was a business owner in Blairgowrie who had ongoing issues with flooding every time there is a bad weather event, how would they find out where Blairgowrie's infrastructure improvements were in your capital investment planning modelling? And then does that, obviously if they then go up and down a list of improvements, because again I think that information and that being straightforward with communities would be appreciated to know where they sit. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the first one and Gavin can take the second one. So the first one, in terms of high risk properties, there are circa 400 properties across Scotland that are on our high risk register. I don't know how many are in Perth on that list, but we can get you that information if you need it. Gavin, do you want to take the second question?
Yeah, so I guess the message to customers who experience flooding from the sewer across the piece, whether in Blairgowrie or anywhere else, is to contact us every time it happens as soon as possible, so that we can build that understanding of what kind of weather situations, also rule out any potential operational contributing factors, and begin that flooding investigation process which Peter described earlier, which can be quite a lengthy and difficult process. It is quite complicated to understand how some of these flooding situations come about, but once those customers are on the flooding registers that Peter's referring to, whether they experience internal flooding or external flooding, there's then a team within our flooding team who provide annual updates to those customers on our progress towards providing initially typically property level protection, and then longer term work to see if we can attenuate the flood risk by upgrading the infrastructure, surface removal and so forth.
If I could just come in, you've mentioned Kieran Johnson there. Speak to Kieran if you have any information needs on any of our capital projects that are on the go, and he'll be able to furnish you with whatever information you need.
Is that something that could be supplied via because it might be of interest, just to, we've seen the really positive around Bell Sports Centre, but just having that picture about across Perth and Kinross, where work is planned, etc. Because we get it we'll all attend lots of different community council meetings, etc., where this comes up, and it's that positive messaging from yourselves about this is, you've talked about the level of investment, but people really want to know what that means for their individual communities, because if there are businesses like the ones that I can think of who are regularly affected, at least having that comfort of knowing you're on the list and you will within the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years get that improvement made.
Thanks very much. And I think maybe just specifically on the bells point, full council took a decision 2 weeks ago to go out to public consultation on the future use of bells. So it might be interesting, rather than rather than the generality of, or as well as the generality of the investment programme in Perth and Kinross, maybe a specific timeline for the Bells North Inch investment, so that we can dovetail that with any decisions and consultations on the future use. That would be helpful. Councillor Smith, you're next with a question.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for the presentation. It was very, very good. One thing I think it's on everybody's minds at the moment is the quality of water that we have throughout the country coming out of these treatment works. Now, you're obviously putting in that upgrading the sewer system, etc. Did, for instance, when we had that bad flood, did we have to release any waste? And will the new system cope better And where can we find maybe a list of how many times you had to release wastewater? Thank you.
Okay, so this is clearly a big topic across the whole of the water industry just now. What I'll start off with is saying that we in Scotland work very closely with the government and our regulators, SEPA in particular, to make sure that we are investing in the areas that have the biggest impact. And through working with SEPA, we have invested in areas to help improve the water quality over the years. And although there is much still to be done, Scotland is currently benefiting from our water courses and bathing waters collectively 87% categorised as good or better quality. Now that compares with England and Wales, which is 16%. So we're starting, and that actually puts us amongst some of the best in Europe. During that flood event, what happens during flood events is if there is incapacity in the sewers not being able to deal with the rainfall, it will either cause flooding upstream that we've talked about, or where there are known relief points in the sewer, it will overflow into the river. That's how sewerage systems are designed. They're designed to have relief points in them to relieve surface water in particular back to the environment to stop people's houses from flooding. In that particular event you talked about, the capacity of Perth Treatment Works is being upgraded, so it will be able to treat more, and it's having to be upgraded to deal with the huge investment and growth that's happening in the northwest of Perth. So it will be sized to deal with that. So it's going to deal with a lot more. And the particular thing is the sewer in Tay Street, which is being upgraded, will prevent some of the issues that have happened, flooding or overflows, because it's got bigger capacity to take it down to the treatment works.
That sounds great, really is. Well done. Thank you very much, because it's very much in people's minds. The worry I have is going back to saying all the wee villages, that there's a lot of treatment plants throughout Scotland. We have one in my village, and it obviously will not be able to accept all the extra water that's coming there. So do you make sure that you monitor all these smaller areas, like smaller treatment works? Because what comes out of there will go into a smaller river, which will eventually go into the river higher up. So it's bypassing all your treatments down here. So I presume the investment will also involve smaller treatment works, not just the main one in somewhere like Perth or Dundee or wherever they are. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have 1,800 wastewater treatment works around the country. All of them require upgrading at certain times. All of them monitored by SEPA in terms of licenses and consents. So absolutely, every single treatment works is treated exactly the same, doesn't matter what size it is.
Councillor Welch.
Thank you for that information, and thank you both for coming to appear before this committee. It's good to see senior figures taking part because of the concern from Perth residents. Two very quick questions, if that's okay, convener. I guess from you touched on Bell's sports centre. I think officers indicated that part of this investment was quite a surprise for them. This is Perth and Kinross Council officers, and all I would do is ask that when you're pulling together these outline business cases for works, I think it's important that you maybe work more closely at an earlier stage with stakeholders and those that potentially can help and inform those plans. So that as a question going forward, and I think convener has flagged it, how are you looking to sort of work with Perth and Kinross Council around the consultation that's out just now, to ensure that effectively we get a joined up approach, because there'll be significant investment for the council to repurpose that facility, and obviously we want to ensure that investment is protected in the future. And my second question was, in the public's eye, there's quite a lot of confusion and overlap between the roles and responsibilities of SEPA and Scottish Water, and I guess the public is actively trying to sort of assist and support some of the concerns of both agencies around, flooding impacts, etc. And with the capacity and capability that most people have now with mobile phones, you are able to get effectively real-time data, which is time-stamped and geolocated. What steps are you taking to be able to use that data to ultimately inform and improve the intelligence going forward to make those significant investments? And one final comment, it's heartening to understand and hear that we are performing better as a nation with our public water supply, and again heartening to see the significant investments that have been made. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the mobile phone question, and Gavin can take the consultation question. So interestingly, because Scottish Water do not have direct billing arrangements with our domestic customers, that's all done through the councils, through a memorandum of understanding, if you like. We do not have phone details for all of our customers, because we don't have a database. We've never had a database set up of customers. It would be absolutely fantastic for me as the operational director to be able to communicate with our customers through mobile phones when we have an outage of any kind, but it's difficult to do because we do not have the contact details. What we are doing is that we are gathering that information when customers contact us, and we're pushing out messages to try and get other people to join up to a database that we're creating at the moment, but it will take some time, and it's purely because we don't have that. We do have loads of other methods of communication during events. Talked about earlier, we use the TV, we use the radio, and if all else fails, we've got loudtailers in our vans that go around the streets and alert customers to problems.
It was just to come back very quickly. It was more specifically, that's good to hear, and maybe we'll explore that within the council around, trying to help in that respect if it's possible. But it was more specific around, for example, how do you capture photographs of flooding events so you can identify hotspots within sort of localities that maybe you can then target investment. With GIS, you can potentially take that data, overlay it, and then create those business cases to invest.
Yes, that information all comes in to us through various means, through our own operational people who are out in the field investigating these, will take photographs. Customers send us in photographs. These are all captured and put onto our GIS system and various databases so that we've got that, and they're all used when we're developing projects to resolve some of these issues.
Just very briefly adding on to that, as I understand it, the basis on which we develop flooding projects is primarily led by modelling, kind of trying to understand through pieces of work like the integrated catchment study what's actually going on underground and where that's causing flooding. We then sort of validate what models are telling us would be expected to happen through what customers are experiencing, and that allows us to fine-tune things and understand in more detail. We've got, no doubt these things will always be improved as time and technology moves on, but we've got an online reporting portal on our website now, which allows customers to, rather than having to necessarily phone up our contact centre if they're, perhaps it's a less severe flood event, but they want to make us aware of what's happened, they can go on there and just log it with us directly and upload a photo. So that functionality is there. Turning to Bell Sports Centre, I suppose I'm sorry to hear that it sounds like some of the officers were surprised by that project coming through our process. I'm not quite sure what the story is there, but I'm fairly confident that the right people at the council are aware of the project now. So hopefully those lines of communication will stay open as the project moves forward. There's probably always things to be learned. Big organisations dealing with each other and personnel changes and so on sometimes don't help. There certainly is a lot of engagement between our flooding team and the council's flooding team, but I guess the Bell's decision making will have been happening within a different part of the council. So there's something for us to learn there, I'm sure, and happy to discuss it further. There's obviously a broader point about consultation with wider community about some of our projects, but I suspect in that case it's particularly making sure the right people at Scottish Water and the council are talking.
Thank you. And our final question is from Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. It's really a follow-up of something that Councillor Smith raised with regard to diversion of untreated sewage into watercourses and things. Gavin, you'll remember we have had many meetings about this with regard to Loch Leven, and one of the proposals by Scottish Water was to fit monitors onto the pipes that would carry untreated sewage into the loch in times of heavy rain. They were meant to be done by the end of this year. Is that still in line to be done?
Absolutely, yes. We've committed to put in 1,000 monitors by the end of this year, and I'm pleased to report that we are well ahead of programme with that, and we'll have these in place before the end of the year.
Great, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. Gavin and Peter, thank you again for your presentation. I think we've got some a note of some further information that will come back, and I see that Councillor Welch asked for the presentations to be circulated. We'll certainly planning to do that anyway. But thank you very much again. So if I could now invite up from SSE, Paul, Owen and James Maxton, please. Okay, thank you very much. We'll just pull your presentation up on screen and I'll just hand over to you to introduce it. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Paul Owen. I'm Head of Programmes with the Hydro Business of SSE Renewables, and this is my colleague Jamie Maxton, Head of External Relations. Tried to, in this presentation, to just give an overview of our assets and the place we can play or do play within the areas that affect the Tay catchment. So if we can flick to the next slide, I'll just give an overview of SSE Renewables, as I say, specifically the hydro. So we operate the largest fleet of hydroelectric power stations in Scotland. In total, we've got 60 power stations and 75 associated reservoirs. Yeah, sorry about that. In total, from there, annually we generate between 3.5–4 terawatts of electricity. So that's carbon-free green energy, which is obviously to be applauded, I think, in this day and age, and drive towards net zero. I think because of the assets and our locations, we've got quite a unique position to play in water management through catchments where we do have assets. That's in drought situations, so we're able to supply water where rivers would have dried up, and that results in habitats being maintained. Give you some examples, but we obviously can't tell you where they are, of freshwater pearl mussels across the patch in Scotland that are protected in that way, and also during periods of flood or potential flood, where we can maybe slow things down and the impact. all these stations are managed by our control centre in Perth, which is a 24/7 operation, and with operatives on the ground, probably in the region of about 200 folk. I'd just like to talk about two of these sections now, which directly impact the Tay catchment. So if we could move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the first is Breadalbyn, and particularly the western part there around Loch Tay, where we have assets on three rivers: the Docker, the Lochie, and the Lion. Within that area, we have some major flexible storage reservoirs, one beneath Ben Law's Loch Lion itself, and then the aptly named Loch Nadam, if I got my Gaelic right there, which allow us to provide some storage and attenuation there. Obviously, ultimately, all that water does end up in Loch Tay, exiting at Kenmore and into the River Lochie system. And just noting, there's a small reservoir just downstream from Loch Lion there, which, when it goes on spill, we notify SEPA. That's part of the function of allowing the picture to be built up of what's happening in water levels, etc., within the catchments. The second one I'd like to talk about is the Tummel Valley. If I could move to the next slide. This stretches from north about Dalwhinnie west to Gore, just by Rannoch Moor there, and then come out of the bottom of the cascade at Pitlochry. Again, we're able to take water that comes down from Loch Garry and basically divert it through a longer path, just slowing it down, and also storing two major reservoirs there, Loch Eric and Loch Ericty. You notice Loch Rannoch is quite a big reservoir on that scheme, but that tends to just manage the flow coming from Rannoch Moor. So on that side of it, we've got limited ability via Gore to sort of stem any flow that will just come into the system. And similarly, although we take out a lot of the water coming in to the east of the River Garry, the flow from the River Tilt, which is roughly Killicranky area, it is basically what we refer to as uncontrolled. So we've got no assets that can do anything with that, and that'll come on straight down to here at Pitlochry. And we've got to move to the next slide just to look at Pitlochry in a bit of detail. Basically, Pitlochry is the bottom of the cascade there for Tummel Valley. In a flood conditions, it basically just acts as a run of river scheme, and we're just trying to manage the water safely through it. So it's characterised by two drum gates on the dam there. So anyone that's been up there will have seen those structures. They're basically 19 feet long steel drums, 150 tons each, that basically float, and their sole purpose is when Loch Fascally is filled to its top level, they basically respond to that level and match inflows coming into Loch Fascally to allow the water to come out in a controlled manner. The reason I'm just focusing a wee bit on that is that I think it seems to be a common conception that we operate those gates in some manner manually. We don't. They're left to operate again against those flows. So if they weren't there and that was a more traditional concrete fixed crest dam, basically the water coming over those gates would just be coming over the top of the dam. So it's not a question of releasing water from them. They are releasing water, but they're matching the inflows that are coming into Loch Fascally, which is full at that point. Again, here we have an obligation to notify SEPA when we're passing 425 cumecs of water from there. So that would probably be with both machines on the ground sluice gate and both those gates on spill. So that's quite a considerable amount of water. So going back to the event, I think on the 7th that occurred at yeah, something like 10 o'clock in the morning, and SEPA were notified. So if I could just move over to the next slide, please. So in summary, we're able to attenuate water and store it within reason, and where we can regulate the flow. So I'm probably taking out some of the peaks and just smoothing it out. What we can't do is stop the water. And as you'll appreciate it, we've only looked at 2 small catchments there on the Tay. There's lots of catchment that we don't have any impact on, or we have assets that aren't able to store water. Where we do, we can. Our overriding operating philosophy is not to have any uncontrolled spill. So we don't look to spill at any of our dams if we can avoid it. What would say that the Picklockery spill is actually controlled because it's been done in a regulated manner. We operate that all from a 24/7 control room based in Perth. I believe we support SEPA in their role of warn and informers, you know, that functionality, and it's a reciprocal arrangement because some of the measuring stations, they're able, particularly on the tilt, to give us information about, which helps us manage our assets. And it's a relationship that if I speak to any of our the shift group leaders who we have running the control room, works well and functions. Yeah, works very well and has done for years, even during periods of cyber attacks and such like. So yes, it's a good working relationship. As noted there, we're not a category 2 responder, but we do engage when asked to, when resilience partnerships have stood up, and I think that's one area we probably need to build on more formally, particularly locally to you know, to the Tay catchment. We're keen to do. So I appreciate that's a very brief summary, but probably wanted to focus on just what are an idea of our assets, where we sit in the catchment, rather than talk about anything specifically from the flood event. So if we have any questions, please fire away.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That's appreciated. And Councillor Allen is first in with the question.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks, Paul, for your presentation. Once again, very helpful and lots of good information in there. That very last slide there suggests that you can't stop water, and I think we'll appreciate that. However, one of your earlier slides suggested that you can divert water to slow it down. How much does it actually slow it down by?
That's a really tricky question. I wouldn't know. I'm not a hydrologist, and I can't. Yeah, I can't put a figure to that. But just basically, I guess by taking it through. Well, maybe I could give an example of that day back in October. So I think that the main body of this, the storm and the event passed by the 8th. We were probably on spill. Our locations still channeling water out till the 13th of October. So that's water we've accumulated into storage. So it could be periods of up to there, and it depends on the catchment. So in Tummel, obviously, if it's not coming down if it's not charging down the River Garry at 6 miles an hour, and we're taking it out through that loop and in and around, yes, I could calculate it, but it would probably be a bit of a meaningless figure. I think the thing is about attenuating it, storing it, and then subsequently releasing it.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. We discussed there the release of water at Picklockery, and you said that that's an automatic procedure. It's not something that's done, but you are able to monitor it. Could you give a little bit more detail around the monitoring and the communication between yourselves and other organisations such as SEPA and obviously the council and the flood defence schemes, and whether there's any lessons to be learned around the events of October?
Yeah, so the calculations will be based on what the machines are passing, calculations around the centre sluice. So there's a separate centre sluice gate underneath the two drum gates that we'll quite often use in preference to the drum gates going on spill. So we know what the aperture of opening that is to work out a flow. Then over the drum gates themselves, again, you can calculate how much by the position of them, how much they're letting over to build up that QMX figure that's passing. There will be a degree of inaccuracy in it, but I think it's not a degree of accuracy that matters. It's probably the scale of it. So from that, when that arrives at and there can be various versions of that, because maybe one of the machines might be broken down or something like that. So there might be only one machine working the centre sluice, and the drum gates are doing more work. So, but anyway, that cumulative figure is calculated, and then we make a formal call to SEPA notifying them that's what we have passing from there, and it is to SEPA, which would be our preferred direct line of communication, because as you appreciate that's that catchment's, I don't know, the region of 1,600 square kilometres, but the catchment probably down at the Belathi measuring point that was talked about, you're probably up about 4,500 to 5,000 square kilometres. So it's only one piece of information in the puzzle. And that's really what the guys, in my opinion, from SEPA do, is pull all those pieces of the puzzle together to give that overall picture, if that makes sense. Or if if I explain myself well.
Yeah, just to add to that, as Paul said, we will get involved in the local resilience partnership so that we can engage with others during these events where we're asked to do so. As he says, I think we feel as we're only a part of the overall picture, that primary relationship with SEPA in terms of providing that information, I think we feel probably remains the best means of doing that. Primarily just because it ensures a consistency of message and a consistency of information coming through ultimately to the public. But that being said, we're always open to considering and looking at how we can change or improve that.
I think ultimately, if we rang up and said, direct to the council, there's 425 QMX passing at Pitlochry, it's a meaningless figure without being built into that bigger picture. I would also have a concern over our when we're operating in flood events, and I think on this particular event we're on flood in four other sections within Scotland. That the least number of points of communication is better. So I think there's two things. I think SEPA allows our teams to manage things more effectively by just having that as a single point of contact, and also it's a meaningless figure without being built up into that bigger picture.
Thank you. So just to clarify, you pass your information to SEPA, and it's then SEPA's responsibility to pass that on to others from your perspective. Yes, from my perspective, you're effectively just using that as it's a measuring station, a monitoring point, to going back to go back to what the guys were saying, and building up of all those different monitoring between points and what's happening across the whole catchment, not just part of it. And you said in your answer there that you're potentially looking at changes to that. Is that likely to happen or not?
We're always open to. I think, as we say, our conclusion at the moment is that remains the best way to do things. But I think we're always open to discussion about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I think that when we were speaking to SEPA, that fits into that real-time exchange of information between the council and SEPA that we were talking about. Councillor Smith, your next question, or your first question, sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm always fascinated with the dam at Pitlochry. I think hydropower is the way to go forward in this country. I'm going to be a bit of Mr. Doomsday here, right? Okay. Let's say, for instance, how old is the dam? Oh. Has it got grey like me too? Yeah. My quick question is that you just said about holding back the water. Let's go into a real extreme here, right? A real extreme. If it fails because of its age, right? Do you have thoughts on that? Could you maybe think now it's getting on, we could maybe build more power things further upstream so we can lessen the effect that would be? Because I would hate to think what would happen. I'll get my boat out in the Med and I assure you if anything happened.
Yeah, we do have quite an extensive program of maintaining those assets, and I can't off the top of my head remember that one was built, but it was about the 1940s. And actually the two drum gates are actually going through a process of refurbishment at the minute, and they were last year. One of the drum gates was getting completed, and the other one is getting completed due to return back to service. So maybe a bit akin to the hip replacement or the knee replacement that I crave. The failure of the assets. So we have to do a lot of work to comply with the Reservoir Act Scotland. So we're continually modelling things, looking through things, inspecting the assets both internally and by independent appointed panel engineers. The dam itself would fail safe, so the situation would be that the gates would drop, so we wouldn't be retaining any water back other than that above the concrete level of where they dropped into. So I can assure you from that perspective, but they are quite, yeah, they scare me a wee bit. 150-ton lumps of metal going up and down, responding to water.
The point was really, it's not Mr. Doomsday. I know you've got a really good system there. My point is that hydro is, in my opinion, the way to go forward. And is there any plans that we could, make more further upstream and use it more? I mean, me personally, I'd have something hanging off the bridges in Perth and use all that water that's going by there to generate the lights in Perth or something. But we need forward thinking. Have you thinking of the future for putting more plants in?
Not within that section of the scheme. I think others do and probably will do that better. Sometimes you see the ones that are run by the estate going up the road there. They're probably better at putting them in than we are as an organisation. But yeah, we'd love to have more. We're obviously looking at the Corrie Glass scheme, which would be huge. I think it's 300 megawatts, isn't it, Jamie? No better than me. Pump storage scheme. There's a further scheme that we've just acquired. So yeah, really keen to build more as a business, but I should leave it to the external relations guy to come in here, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we would fundamentally agree that actually, hydro has been around for a long time, but its time has really come again. Its value to the system, particularly as we move to a renewables-led system, its value in terms of storage and flexibility is massive. So I think in terms of the existing schemes, there is probably a limit to what we can do on them, but it is about maintaining those assets and making sure they continue to operate safely, but also where we've got opportunities to optimise those. So we're just literally have concluded a complete refurbishment of the Tummel Bridge station, which is the first time those generation units have been replaced in 100 years, which actually shows you the robustness of the design of these schemes actually when they were originally built. And in fact, when we looked at Tummel Bridge and realised that opportunity to try and maximise it, and we looked at potential designs for that, actually we concluded that they got it right in the first place. So we've been able to squeeze another couple of megawatts out of that, but essentially we've replaced like for like, but new, essentially. And as Paul says, I think the real opportunity in terms of future new investment and new capacity in hydro is probably in pump storage hydro. So yeah, Corrie Glass, which is on Loch Lochy, which we're just doing the exploratory works for just now, that will essentially double the UK's energy storage capacity overnight. Essentially, it's over 1 gigawatt of capacity, 30 megawatt hours. So that's 2 million plus homes when it's sort of been able to provide for when it's operating at peak. And as Paul says again, we've just also bought into a scheme on Loch Ferna. So yeah, I mean, I think the reality is we will with the existing hydro schemes, it is about continuing to operate them and maintain them safely and extend their life as much as possible. But I think I would say we've got a fair degree of confidence in that with the ability to maintain and invest in them, because frankly, when you look at the original designs of the schemes, these schemes were well designed and well built in the first place.
Thank you. I've got questions from Councillor Welch and Councillor Shires, unless anybody else has anything burning. Thanks, Vice Convener. I'm going to draw questions to a close at that point. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Convener. It's encouraging to hear your comments about Scotland's place to play in energy. I think most recently the chairperson of the CBI in Scotland, made the statement that Scotland's energy resources are the envy of most European countries, and it's good to hear that they're being exploited. Perhaps maybe some of that wealth could be better deployed in Scotland itself, but that's for another day. My particular question was with regards to, well, firstly, 2 questions. Are there any changes to your procedures, either operational or otherwise, that you put in place following the unfortunate incidents in Perth in October? Second question, in terms of you make the point, and it's a good point, well made, that the value of hydro is very much around demand management now, and that is a significant commercial value. There's obviously, to an extent, a bit of a conflict between managing that commercial value and, for example, dropping water levels in advance of potentially weather forecasting, where that may not be in your commercial interest, but in actual fact, as a mechanism of effectively managing the catchment and managing the risk of flooding downstream, that has a commercial value, but maybe not in your books. How do you manage that conflict, if you like? Because Perth, as you know, is in a further nuance in that, has a very much a significant tidal impact, and that whole aspect of energy, timing, and commercial value, and ultimately protection of the residents of Perth is very important. Thank you.
Yeah, so with regard to operating procedures, the floodgates and Pitlochry and the assets actually all performed how they should do. So there's no specific improvement loop to be taken through there. Very, very pleased of how they operated. I know that doesn't reduce the impact for you, for the folk of Perth. So no, not directly around that. With regard to your question, I think that we don't look to spill. So we will always drive the reservoirs down as much as possible. And I seem to remember that there was another weather event came through on about the 16th of October. So even though, as I say, we came off spill, we were actually, irrespective of the economic market, driving those stations to make freeboard to take that next storm coming through, which wasn't actually, from memory, wasn't as bad as it was looking like. So we do drive them down. We have an awkward position, to go back to the the drought conditions, that we can't leave ourselves too low by the time we come out of winter, because then if we run into a drought season, and there are rivers, I think it's occurred in the River Garry in the time I've been with with SSE, but it's certainly twice at a scheme, and Kerry falls up near lot more up anyway, up on the west coast there, where the river would have dried up if we hadn't been able to supply them. We literally had the Kerry Falls scheme probably 5 days of water left to do that. So it's a fine balance finding that sweet point, but generally storage we try to be running at, I think we try to run at about 30%. And yeah, a driver for two reasons: managing the water, and for commercial reasons as well. Spills lost money, I guess, for us, isn't it? That, you know, our imperative is not to spill. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, to an extent. I'm just wondering if, in light of, you know, the dynamics, particularly of Perth, that more attention is given to that in terms of improvements of forecasting. You know, you've got public agencies that are able to provide data in terms of, you know, how saturated ground is, and potentially you can drive potentially additional capacity that specifically around times of high tide, for example, could alleviate what could be any future issues, bearing in mind these problems are becoming bigger going forward.
Yeah, I think with regard to tides, when you're set in there, there's very little you can do once we're into that period from the, you know, the 7th of October. But to your point, we form bronze, silver and gold commands to manage situations. We probably went into a command position. I should have checked my details to come out, certainly on the Friday the 6th. So from Friday the 6th, we were already in a command position trying to manage the situation, and prior to that we were still looking through at the beginning of the rain coming through as a yellow warning. We will start to drive as much as possible we can, but we can only shift so much water through our sets as well, and that's quite often be the limiting factor. So you can get an overall position where you can position yourself for a winter or whatever where you'd like to be. Then you're probably getting probably looking at a week's sort of notice at most when things are coming through as weather patterns, given, you know, how good that information's coming. We use all available sources to map that, but just out of interest, when COVID happened, because of the lack of transatlantic flights, the information got worse. So you had less time, but you probably got only a week to start building in and driving things harder if you've seen those fronts.
I think you might want to come back in on this because you're the expert rather than me, but I think in terms of that tunnel scheme, obviously there are, as Paul was outlining, there are some of those locks and reservoirs have much more storage than others, and where we have big storage during that event, we held all the water back essentially. So and we were nowhere near in those two big reservoirs actually having to release water. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we pretty much held back everything we could.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
I think you possibly answered my question. I'm just maybe going to frame it slightly differently to the way Councillor Welsh did. Part of the reason that we're here is because residents were, you know, really concerned about what had happened, and we're looking to make sure that any lessons learned have been learned, so that, you know, we can't say it'll never happen again, unfortunately, but we want to mitigate as much as possible. So, and for me, it was really helpful to know that there's not somebody sitting up at Pitlochry that, you know, presses a button to open and close gates, because I'm not an engineer. That understanding of how it works is really helpful. And my question was around, quite basically, is there anything that, looking back now, that you think, yes or no, could have been done differently, that might have alleviated the pain that householders and businesses felt after that October event? Thank you.
No, I don't believe there is. We went on spill. So before our peak spill occurred at 3 o'clock on the Saturday. Dropped off a wee bit, built up again to the same level at the sort of 2 o'clock in the morning of the Sunday morning, which would have ultimately led to the flood, and again slight drop, and it picked up again on the Sunday. So our assets at Pitlochry function correctly. They function correctly from a period before and after the flooding event. I don't believe there's anything within our operations we could have done differently.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, and Vice Convener, your question's been asked. Okay, that's fine. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, therefore. So thanks very much to Paul and James for your presentation and for coming along and answering the questions. Members, I did say at this point that we would open it up to a sort of general Q&A to the partner agencies. Does anybody have any more questions generally, either to the partner agencies or to officers about the severe weather event? Councillor Shars.
I think if anyone's got their bingo cards ready, you'll know what I'm coming in with, Councillor Stewart. My question is about the sort of wider communication breakdowns that happen during these weather events, and very parochial, but I make no apology for it, the impact up in the Mount Blair area when telecommunication masts go down on a regular occurrence, and there's just, you know, we talked about the communications and emails and mobile phone alerts, but folk in rural areas across great swathes of Perth and Kinross just don't get them. And I think I'm going to come back to it again. I just think this is a bit of a missing link if we're looking at our learnings from events like this and how we can make our communities as resilient as possible. And I'm still going to ask that we make efforts to communicate with the people that manage those masts and the batteries that they require for backup, etc.
Okay, thanks very much. Has anybody else got any other general points or comments or questions to make? I think we'll take that point. I think that's a valuable point. I mean, I know that there are certainly areas that are not even nearly as remote as Mount Blair, where there are mobile data, mobile signal difficulties. But I think we can maybe sort of take that point and have a think about how to approach that and how to raise that with the appropriate authorities. If there's no other questions or comments, I think we will take a recess and allow our partner organisations to leave and maybe rearrange a bit. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Alex and Vincent from SEPA, Gavin and Peter from Scottish Water, and Paul and James from SSE for coming along again and giving your presentations and being so open and forthcoming with your answers. I think members have gleaned a lot of information that perhaps we weren't, and indeed officers have as well, that perhaps we didn't have a full grasp of before. So I think it's been a really useful exercise in getting you along and getting you to explain the actual the methods of operation of your organisations and your future plans. So thank you very much. If there's no other comments, we will stand in recess until 11:50. We'll give yourselves 15 minutes. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Perth and Kinross Council Annual Performance Report for 23-24. Mr. Boland, are you going to introduce this one?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, councillors. I'm pleased to present the Perth and Kinross Council Annual Performance Report for financial year 23-24. This report is a key component of our strategic planning and performance framework, supporting the delivery of our council's vision and achievement of our outcomes. The report provides an overview of our performance against our priorities, actions and key performance indicators outlined in our corporate plan. The annual performance report is structured into several sections aligned to our key priorities and supported by a range of appendices. The appendices are an executive summary, which provides a quick overview of key performance measures and trends for each priority, an update on the corporate development improvement plan for 24-25, There are also links within the report to case studies, financial information and additional report on how we are performing against the best value themes which are set nationally. Throughout the report, they are examples of how our services are positively impacting individuals, businesses and communities. However, we do recognise the challenge we faced in 23-24 and those that lie ahead. I would highlight that this is a transitional year for several reasons. The Council has undertaken phase 1 of the leadership review and operating models across the Council are still being implemented. Alongside this, we are reviewing our strategic planning and performance management framework. As we review our strategic planning and performance framework, we will review the corporate development and improvement plan approach and how this ties in with our corporate plan and annual performance reporting arrangements. We are proposing that this is developed into a 3-year rolling programme, as often long-term improvements are not seen or realistically achievable within a 12-month period. The committee today are asked to scrutinise the annual performance report for 23-24, providing any feedback which they would want to be incorporated into the final report, which will be presented to Council on the 30th of October. Also to identify any areas of performance for further scrutiny at future committees. We have officers from across the Council to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up to questions from members. Vice Convener.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 49 of the overall document pack, the action rated to total household waste recycled, composted as a percentage of all household waste. I note that our performance in that respect has only gone up by 2.1 percentage points since the last year. Presumably that is low because the new recycling with the grey bins only kicked in. I believe that started in sort of September, October time, so we're not getting a full year impact. But wondered if I could ask the question, what is expected to be the full year impact? Is that still expected to take us to the 60%, or will further action be needed to get us all the way to the target on that metric? Thank you.
Councillor, Convener Fraser-Cross will answer that question.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, so as the Vice Convener correctly stated there, that information relates to the recycling figures pre-rollout of the 4th bin. We don't have the detail behind the impact that will have, albeit it has been very positive. But we hope to report back to that, if not this time next year, before that. And in terms of the target, I think that is challenging at 60%, but we'll just need to see what impact the rollout has had in terms of our overall performance.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. And just apologies to you all for being a little bit late this morning. My question, or my first question, is on child poverty. There's quite a lot of reference to child poverty in the document, and I always seem to lose track of how we measure child poverty and what the current numbers are. So can we start perhaps by getting a reminder of what the current situation is with child poverty in Perth, what the numbers are? And then I've got a follow-up to that, please.
So, Councillor Forbes, our figures round about just short of 6,000, but Margaret Lynch, our poverty officer, will come in with a bit more detail.
Hello, hi. Yes, so the figures this year are just marginally down on last year's figure at 5,170. But I would caution, the approach that we take here, because the Scottish Government figures are accurate. Are assessed as being 95% accurate, but within quite a broad bandwidth of between 18 and 30%. And just last week, Sheru, the Scottish Health Equalities Research Unit, published a report. You might have seen it covered in on the BBC, which basically said that the local poverty data is not as robust as it could or should be. So broadly, so we're kind of aware of that, and that's why we've got the children's scorecard, which is we publish that every year. It'll come to the full council on the 30th of October alongside our local child poverty action report. And what we do there is we break it down into, we've got 26 different indicators that measure the impact of child poverty, and it gives us an idea of whether or not we're managing to mitigate the impact of poverty on children and families. But pretty much child poverty in Perth and Kinross and in the rest of Scotland has remained static. It's flatlined since 2017. I think most people regard that as being a victory, because since 2017 we had the COVID pandemic and then the cost of living crisis, and the expectation really is that there would, you know, without the mitigating measures that the council and the Scottish and UK governments have put in place to deal with the pandemic and the cost of living crisis, that those figures would be significantly higher.
Thanks very much for that, Margaret. And Convener, if you don't mind, just a quick follow-up. And I think this is the thing that concerns me. We seem to be investing an awful lot of resource into child poverty, but as Margaret said, the figures are flatlining, and that concerns me. Just one more specific question. The Anti-Poverty Task Force, can I ask what progress that has been making, when it last met, and what any outcomes we can measure from that?
I certainly can partly answer that, but maybe not completely. I've been working with the Anti-Poverty Task Force over the course of the last year. We've gone out and we've had a really quite a deep consultation with wide range of different stakeholders, and we will be bringing tackling poverty strategy, which belongs to the Anti-Poverty Task Force, and it's their initiative, to the council on the 30th of October. And I think that's a really important piece of work, because it kind of marks a departure from the past, where the expectation was that poverty belonged to the council, and it was the council's job to lead, or if you like, be the largest partner, the largest contributing partner on all actions related to poverty. The task force have, I think, taken ownership of this, and they're presenting a tackling poverty strategy to the council, which basically involves, I would say, a much broader collaboration across public sector partners, third sector partners, and we're seeking to involve businesses in that as well. And the fruits of that, I think, will come in the year following. I mean, they've had, it's no secret that they've had a few challenges, but I've certainly spent quite a bit of time with the new leadership of PCAVS and the new leadership of the Anti-Poverty Task Force, and I would be very confident that this new departure will yield significant results, and it will achieve what we've not been able to achieve so far, which is a sharing of the responsibility for tackling poverty across our communities and across the organisations that provide services for them.
Thanks for that, Margaret. I'm very reassured by what you've said. I presume, therefore, at some point in the next of these reports, or perhaps one after, we'll hopefully see some decrease in the child poverty measures, rather than just be happy that they haven't gone up. So appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I think Mrs. Miller wants to come in.
Thank you. I think just to add, and without going into too much detail, but just to add a little bit to Margaret's overview there. Yes, I mean, tackling poverty continues to be a priority, and I think, you know, all of the measures I think have been effective in sort of stabilising and indeed slightly reducing the numbers. So what you see there within the report is a reduction in terms of the child poverty figures. Obviously, we want to sort of, you know, reduce that more significantly. But if it were not for the measures that were in place, I think we would be seeing quite a different figure that we're here. In terms of the anti-poverty task force, Margaret's given the overview there in terms of the work, the workshops, and indeed the poverty strategy and the child poverty delivery plan that will come before council at the council meeting. Apologies, in October. But I think what's also important to note is that Greg, myself, and indeed others have been working very, very closely with the Community Planning Partnership. We will get more information out to councillors in the forthcoming sort of weeks, but we've done a repositioning of the priorities through the Community Planning Partnership with a real focus on employability, health and wellbeing, and indeed poverty, and strengthened that alignment with the key working groups, the anti-poverty task force being one, in terms of that connection between the CPP and indeed the various, you know, employability, health and wellbeing, and indeed the anti-poverty task force to sort of strengthen that partnership approach at a very locality level in terms of the work that we do. Another key point I would say is that you'll probably have read through the programme for government, we were one of a number of local authorities to secure some fairly significant funding to support our poverty work and indeed our locality work. Carol and I have just been in liaison and we're just finalising the arrangements, so that will really sort of step up our approach. The Improvement Service continue to support us with the work that we're doing in Highland, Perthshire, and indeed the Wellbeing Alliance, the Wellbeing Economy, the work that we're doing across Latham. So yeah, work does continue, and as Margaret has said, the Anti-Poverty Task Force continue to be sort of front and centre of that.
Thanks. Can I just double check the two documents coming to full council in October are?
Convener.
Sorry, there's three documents coming to council in October: the Tackling Poverty Strategy, the Local Child Poverty Action Report, and the Children's Scorecard.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. On page 90, it suggests that there's a 4% of the fleet are electric. On page 47, it says we've got a target of 3.85, yet the reality is it's 3.6. And the reason for it being lower is that one electric vehicle has been written off following an accident. Then it goes on to say the total number of PKC vehicles increasing. If we are committed to transitioning our fleet to low emission vehicles, how does that work? Thank you.
Mr. Crofts.
Thanks, Convener. We'll need to check the specifics behind the numbers there. I'm happy to do that and come back. In terms of our approach to decarbonising the fleet, we will be aiming to bring back a further update on our EV strategy early into the new calendar year in 2025. Obviously, the industry is the subject of some challenges at the moment in terms of the targets and the way that the car manufacturing industry, in particular cars, I say, and for small vans, is reacting to the targets that are being set at a national level. So we will report back on that. That will include updates as to how we ensure we have the appropriate infrastructure in place in order to support that fleet as well. Just as a side issue, you'll be aware of the fact that we've introduced hydrogenated vegetable oil for our heavy vehicles, or a trial of that. That has been successful with significant decarbonisation of some of the heavy fleet. and we'll be looking to consider whether or not we further roll that out across the rest of the refuse vehicles going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. My concern is in the key performance indicators regarding the number of new business startups with Business Gateway, etc. The trend is very poor, and you can see on the next page, number of registered businesses, creative industry is got a cross against it as well, and below as well. And yet there's a tick saying there's percentage of premises connected gigabit broadband has increased. Any explanation for this at all?
Mr. Littlejohn.
They're not all directly connected, but I can try and explain. So the overall number of business startups has dropped as it has done across Scotland. We still actually perform pretty well, as do the other Tayside council. I think we're probably the 8th highest best performing area for business startups. There's a direct correlation between business startups and the state of the economy and the percentages of unemployed people. The higher the unemployment rate, we tend to see more people moving into business startups. So that is part of the explanation, and therefore that's also part of the explanation for the creative industries fall as well. Number of individuals who are artists and makers setting up their own business as opposed to seeking employment. So there is a link there, but we recognise we do want to do more to encourage more activity in the creative industries. We run a creative accelerator programme, for example, with Elevator, who are one of our contractors. We want to look at if they can do more of that. Your third point was about the gigabit and broadband access. I'm not sure the point you're making. There's not necessarily a connection between the number of creative industries businesses and their access to high-speed broadband directly.
Thank you very much. It's just we're looking to grow the economy. Everybody is, and the indicators are there are not good, and yet we seem to be providing lots of people with the ability to get involved in business. So I think it's definitely something we've got to put a wee bit more effort into. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could just have a follow-up on that. Is there an easy way of comparing the council's economic development spend with our partners, for example, on either directly or through Business Gateway, through Accelerator, through GrowBiz, for example, and looking at the return generated in order to see what the most what the best value model for delivery is?
Again, that's fairly complex because they're not necessarily comparing similar approaches. So the Business Gateway model is a national delivery model for business startup and business growth. GrowBiz, for example, tends to do a lot of kind of peer-to-peer mentoring, and there's duplication between the two. So we need to try and find a way to take out the duplication, because lots and lots of kind of businesses get support from both. They'll get the peer-to-peer mentoring support through partners like GrowBiz. They'll also be getting startup support from Business Gateway. They'll also be participating on accelerator programs or other programs that we are funding and being delivered via Elevator. So there's probably a piece of work to be done with partners, because we don't deliver any of these services directly. You don't have to look down to the named business to try and make sure you were able to kind of abstract the duplication out of all of that. So I think that's probably a difficult piece of work to do, but I can certainly look at it and see if there is a way to try and provide more of that information, because I think it's an interesting point.
Thank you. I think it'd be useful, because I think members would I see Councillor Smith nodding, want to maximise the council's spend and investment in that area. Next question is from Councillor Roberts.
Thanks, Convener. I'm on page 46, and it says that a couple of just small questions. It says that there was £353,000 received from the government's Nature Restoration Fund. Is that money now at risk because of government cutbacks? That's the first question. And if I can have a quick answer to that, I'll come back with my second question.
Okay, Nature Restoration Fund. Oh, Mr. Crofts again.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not sure if my colleague Scott Walker is on the call or in the room today, but from my understanding, we have received funding for the Nature Restoration Fund, albeit there has been an announcement, obviously, from Scottish Government that is the subject of some level of reduction. But at this stage, we have received some funding, and we await further confirmation from Government as to whether or not there's any clawback on that.
Okay, and I don't know if Ms. Grant, you had put in the chat as well. I don't know if you've got more information.
No, I think Mr. Crofts answered it all.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you for that quick answer. The other, on the same topic, it says that in the report that we've planted 2,500 trees in council-owned and managed open spaces. Are these trees going to be managed or just going to be allowed to grow wild? The reason I ask that question is because as a councillor, I often get issues with people asking for council trees to be trimmed back or sorted in some way, and we don't seem to have a fund for that. So if we're committed to planting all these trees, I was wanting to know if we're actually committed to actually looking after them.
Mr. Crofts.
Thank you, Convener. I think Andy Clegg hopefully can answer that question.
Yep, sorry, I hadn't scrolled down far enough. Mr. Clegg.
Yes, good morning, councillors. Thanks, Convener. Yes, we obviously look very carefully about where we're planting new trees on our parks and the types of trees we're putting in. So very much we'll obviously manage those carefully within the resources we've got, but obviously we can't guarantee those resources going forward. But certainly where we're planting them, the types of trees we're using should mean that they're maintainable for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a few questions, if that's okay. I didn't see anybody else in the list and I kept waiting. But so the first one is maybe just a bit of a explanation, really. On page 24, under Business Growth and Investment, it says the Roads Maintenance Partnership facilitated external dining in city centres. I don't quite understand what that means.
Mr. Littlejohn?
Either Mr. Crofts or self can answer that. That's in changes to planning permission. It used to be that people required planning consent to operate outdoor seating and dining areas. That's no longer a requirement. It's an agreement with the Council Roads Authority. So it's our roads colleagues facilitating the ability of restaurants and bars to provide external seating and dining areas.
Okay, thank you. And just over from that, supporting individuals into work. It suggests that we have supported 901 adult learners to achieve a qualification. Now, that in itself is all very well, but has that helped people into work?
Probably ask Alison Seggy to provide more information on that. Or it might
Thank
be David
you. It's
Stoko,
actually probably one for David Stoko. It's the adult learning team, the community learning colleagues that deal with that programme of work.
Yeah, that's right, Alison. Thank you, and thanks for the question. Yeah, the 901 adult learners relates to the work of the Perth and Kinross Council Adult Learning team and also the Adult Learning Partnership. And the focus for those services and partners is to work with learners who are very much at the start of their journey for employability. So typically these are people who will have multiple barriers, maybe lack confidence, potentially substance misuse or mental health issues as well. So learners who need quite a lot of support. So the progression routes for them are to go on, perhaps do other courses at the college, or other courses with us, or to get into volunteering, or perhaps do some training. So they are some way off employment at that point, but the focus of the learning is to start giving them some of the skills and confidence and get accredited qualifications, so that actually it does allow them to progress. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that. Yep, appreciate the answer. On page 77, there's a graph there that talks about the percentage of residents satisfied with local leisure facilities. And it suggests that there's no trend data there against a target of 75%, but it's given a red statistic. Do we think that that's going to get any better when people learn about PH2O?
It's a speculative question. We'll get the data when we get the local government benchmarking framework data through. Whether or not that is affected for 23-24 or not is a moot point, but in subsequent years, I guess the availability and access and provision of leisure facilities will affect people's perceptions of the service that they're getting. So, there may be a dip in 24-25, but I'm speculating, and then we'd hope to see an improvement again as those new facilities come on stream. But I can't really speculate what the future responses might be.
That's fair enough. Thank you. And my final question is on page 78. The performance for 23-24, improve health and well-being in Perth and Kinross by ensuring that people have access to well-being support when they need it. It just appears to have fallen off the cliff, and I just wonder if somebody can respond to that.
I think you might need to be a wee bit more specific with your question.
Yep, I can be specific. In 2021, it was 91%. In 21-22, it was 80%. In 22-23, it was 89%. There's a current target of 80%. The actual was 57%. Thank you.
I don't know if the chief officer is on the line. Or somebody from the Health and Social Care Partnership. Will we maybe hope Claire to want to answer?
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll catch up with colleagues from Health and Social Care and we'll get a response to that answer.
Convener, it's Jackie Pepper here. I am online. If the question could be repeated.
Yeah, on page 78 of the report, under the section Improve Health and Wellbeing in Perth and Kinross by ensuring that people have access to wellbeing support when they need it. It's suggesting that the percentages have gone from 91 to 80 to 89, and the target was 80%, yet the actual was 57%. I just wonder why it had fell so badly. Thank you.
I think some of that will be around some of our ability to collect data, but I will double check up on that and come back to you if that's okay, unless Chris Jolly's on the line and able to answer that.
No, I don't think Mr. Jolly's on the line, so we'll
I'll
come
come
back.
back to you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And have you got another one? No, okay, that's fine. Okay, Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm guessing Andy Clegg's probably going to be the one to answer this. It's page 74 of the document pack, and I'm sure you'll be horrified to learn it's about play parks. But just the first thing before I go into my question, there's a link under the case study section, the Scottish Government's Children's Play Park Renewal Initiative. That link takes the user to somewhere completely different. So before this goes live, it's probably worth having a wee look at that. But my specific question is on funding. It says above that link in 23-24, 291,000 of Scottish Government funding was utilised, supplemented by the Council's own programme and fundraising groups. And then it goes on to talk about Ofter Arder in the case study. Is that different money, or is it all the same money? Is the 300,000 the total, with 291,000 of it coming from the Scottish Government, or is there more money in there? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, we combine the Scottish Government money with our own capital programme money and money that the communities raise to deliver the whole programme each year. And the total cost depends on how many play areas we're actually upgrading each year, but it often exceeds, it would exceed the individual budgets of either the Scottish Government, ourselves, or the community. That's why we work it in partnership, so all of those budgets come together and allow us to deliver the full programme each year.
Thanks, Andy. So, yes, it does. Just another specific, if that's okay, as a follow-up. There's reference there in the same page to 1.74 million of government money. Have we got all of that money now, and have we spent all of it, or are we still anticipating to get that before the end of the current Scottish Parliament period?
We get it in blocks of money released. It's accelerating. So we started off with, I think it was about 150,000 in the first year, and then it's gradually increased. And I think the final block, something like 750,000 in 25-26. So each year we get a release of that money, and then work out our programme of improvements to reflect the amount of money that we've got.
Thanks, Andy. My last question on this topic. I seem to remember that an average play park cost about 100,000. I think when we did Invergowrie, it was in that kind of number. I'm guessing inflation's made a huge difference to that. So if it's possible, are you able to give me an average ballpark figure of what it would cost to completely renew a play park?
Well, obviously we've got a number of different classifications of play area, going from the likes of Ofter Arder, which is a premier site, of which we've fairly few, down to the smaller local play areas that just cater for the 4 to 8 year olds. However, as an average, we'd say it's probably more like about 120,000 per play area now, and that would be.
And we've got 149, is that right?
145 overall.
145
play areas.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Thank you, Convener. That's me done.
No problem. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to follow up on one of Councillor Allen's questions about or continuing a theme that raised its head in one of Councillor Allen's questions, and that was all about I'm looking at the executive summary and developing a resilient, stronger, greener local economy and the cultural and heritage promotion. And we're talking about the investment there in Perth Museum, major events like the Grand Fondo and the Christmas lights switch on. I wondered, we've heard from some of the sporting groups, particularly in relation to Bells, about the loss of the ability to hold certain sporting events while Bells is shut. Do we have an idea of the GVA that's been lost as a consequence of these events not being able to be held at Bells, as opposed to, we can calculate the GVA, the gross value added from the Grand Fondo and so on, but can we calculate the gross value lost by losing certain events?
Not easily. I mean, GVA is is a calculation of it's a multiplier calculation based on actual spend aggregate up over a large geography. You would need to look at what money wasn't spent at all by those accessing live active services that wasn't replaced by them doing them somewhere else. I don't think we would be able to make that type of calculation. I can't see an obvious way of measuring that at all.
Okay, thank you. And I had another question, which was on the priority around protecting and caring for our most vulnerable people. The key area for improvement there is to, this is page 27 of our papers, is to build on our partnership approach to assess and minimise the risk of significant harm to children through early support and assessment, enhance housing support by implementing an intensive housing support service for people with complex needs, ensure children who cannot remain at home are kept within their kin network, and maintain significant relationships for care experienced children to adhere to the principles of the promise. Take a breath. What I wondered was, is that actually a key area for improvement, or is all of the items outlined there sound to me like they should be business as usual rather than something that we need to improve or look to improve in the future? Mr. Sim.
Thank you, convener. I mean, I would argue there are areas for improvement. Clearly, business as usual is what practice is like at the moment, and what we're recognising here is either through government guidance or changes in legislation or changes in terms of common demographics, then it is important that we look to improve the way we deliver services. So a number of the initiatives that I detail there will mean changes in practice and improvements in outcomes for our most vulnerable communities.
Okay, thanks. I'll maybe catch up with you after about that one. So next question, Councillor Anna, I will come back to you, but there's others with fewer questions asked. So Vice Convener first.
Thank you. My question is about the, it's really pulling the thread a bit further of the question that was asked earlier about the percentage of children living in poverty on page 40 of the report. It does say in the report, and we heard earlier from the person who responded, that there are quite big margins for error on that. And I suppose my request is to ask whether or not it would be possible in future years for those margins of error to be illustrated in the reports when we're looking at these numbers, because on the face of it, we've moved from 21.9 to 21.7. But if both those figures have a margin of error of maybe plus or minus 10%, then we know that actually we may not have been steady over that period, but it does look as if we've been steady over that period. So I guess the short version of the question is it possible for us to get someone who remembers their stats better than I do from school to bring the margins of error and illustrate those on any areas of these reports where they're based on samples rather than the full data set? Thank you.
Mrs. Mailer.
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, as you can see, it's a very difficult area to measure. There's a lot of, I suppose, different set of component parts and context in terms of actually measuring child poverty that we all grapple with, kind of not just at a local but at a national level. I described some of the work earlier to you that we're doing through the Scottish Government Programme for Government Fairer Futures, and actually that kind of monitoring is one area that we're looking at within that kind of local family group in terms of how we can really capture more robust data. We will pick it up, absolutely, and I think it's an action for us to pick up within the reports that we've said are coming forward to Council in October as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Apologies, I wasn't quite ready for you bringing me in there. I'm on page 56, and it's relating to the number of people that went into libraries, which I see has gone up, and that's really good news. So not just libraries, all CPK venues. And it does clarify at the bottom the figure includes opening weekend of Perth Museum. I wonder if we're able to extrapolate that and take that opening weekend out. Would the figure still be as good?
I don't know if Karen Johnson's on the line. No.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Karen Johnson.
Hello there. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, carry on.
Hi. Yes, the figure for the first 2 days was just under 5,000 for that opening weekend, which was right at the end of the year. So it can be removed and it will still show a good increase year on year on the figures for various different events going on in the library and a lot of different engagement events in the run up to the museum opening, which have impacted those numbers.
That's excellent. Pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. I didn't say this earlier, but I actually enjoyed the report, and I did read it, and there's lots of questions have come out of that. But on page 25, we're talking about enabling our children and young people to achieve their full potential. And under ensuring comparable outcomes, just towards the end there, it suggests, however, we continue to monitor the emotional distress and risk-taking behaviour amongst young people due to the impacts of COVID-19. Now, I appreciate that we would have had that. I'm just trying to understand and establish, are these impacts going to be long-term? Are they going to tail off? Are they going to continue in annual reports? Can you give me some indication of that, please?
Mrs. Devlin.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Allen. I think the short answer is we're probably going to see the impact of the pandemic, at least for a generational cycle, in relation to some children and young people. So, for example, we know that, and we've discussed in papers before, that the impact on young people who were born during periods of lockdown, who we can see demonstrable deficiencies in relation to acquisition of speech and language, for example, in comparison to some of their peers, ability to socialise, to be toilet trained, to take turns on entering school, and in relation to older young people who were impacted by periods of lockdown, we have seen heightened levels of anxiety amongst groups of young people. And indeed, during the pandemic and since, we have seen an increase in young people and their risk-taking behaviour. And so, whilst all services are working to mitigate and work in partnership with parents, families and communities to mitigate that, there will undoubtedly be some long-lasting impacts of the pandemic that we will see for some time to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any more questions in the room or online? Not seeing any. Okay. Are there any general comments on the report from members? Okay. No. So we'll move. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Robertson. Sorry, missed that.
Thanks, Convener. I actually thought it was a really well laid out report and easy to follow. It did generate a lot of questions, I know, but because people are interested in the performance of the council. So I think well done to officers for the way it's been laid out, and I certainly enjoyed reading it as well as Councillor Allen.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much to officers for bringing the report and for answering their questions. We have a couple of points to get back to members on. I'll turn to the recommendations in the report. It's first of all recommended that the committee scrutinise the annual performance report and provide feedback to be incorporated into the report for council. And I think certainly we've, in relation to the point about the statistical margins, we've done that, and then identify any area of performance for further scrutiny at future committees. We could talk about the there were a number of questions around child poverty, but I'm conscious that we've got papers coming to council anyway in relation to that. But I think a remaining area the Chief Executive has helpfully suggested in the chat would be a future paper to Scrutiny and Performance about business support, if members are agreeable to that. Agreed. Okay, can we... okay, so can we agree those recommendations then, or agree the report? Agreed. Thank you very much. The next item is the Integration Joint Board Annual Performance Report for 23-24, and the discussion on that point is going to be led by the Vice Convener.
Thank you, Convener. So we have the report on the Integration Joint Board Annual Performance Report. I'd like to in turn pass to Jackie Pepper to introduce the report before we go to questions. Go ahead, Jackie.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you well.
That's great, thank you. The annual performance report for the Health and Social Care Partnership and the IJB is a statutory requirement, and this report that's before you today was submitted to Scottish Government at the end of July, and in advance of that it was approved by the Integration Joint Board's Audit and Performance Committee and noted by the Integration Joint Board at its meeting on the 21st of August. This is the first time that this full report has been brought to the Scrutiny and Performance Committee, and we'll move on to Council for consideration alongside the Council's annual performance report at the end of October. The overview of performance for the period 1st of April 23 to 31st of March 24 is very much linked to the National Health and Wellbeing outcomes. That's what we are required to report on. However, this report is set out in a way to tell a broader story and tell the full story, including service user experience through care opinion, which has been rolled out across all of the services managed by the Health and Social Care Partnership. And that provides a dynamic mechanism for hearing and responding to personal experiences. So overall, our performance, our assessment of performance is positive, with 21 indicators reported in this report, 13 assessed as green, 3 as amber, and 5 as red. So we're making, in the covering report, we're noting the progress that we're making in assisting people to remain at home and the inroads into reducing time spent in hospital, and particularly when that's unnecessary, and also highlighting a real focus for improvement in relation to the number of emergency admissions and readmissions, which was a focus for discussion at the Integration Board. So happy to take questions, Convener.
Thank you very much. So we're asked to scrutinise this report. So does anyone have any questions? Please indicate in the chat if you do. While you're all changing into your health and social care hats, I'll just fill the silence with a question. My question is related to page 121. Some of the indicators there are really interesting because we see some really big variances from the rest of Scotland there, especially on A&E admissions per capita and delayed discharge. The indication would be that we're close to a quarter or a third below the national average. Is that mostly because of the fact that we have a rural population and the Edinburghs and Glasgows dominate those with their more urban population, or is there something we're doing differently locally that means we do much better on the so-called bed blocking and on reducing A&E admissions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Vice Convener. I'll pick up the second point that you referred to there in terms of our performance in relation to delayed discharge. Our performance nationally is considered currently weekly, with weekly reporting to the Cabinet Secretary. and so therefore I can absolutely give you an up-to-date picture in relation to that. In relation to how we are performing with our comparators, which we would include areas with large geographically spread populations and also an age profile similar to ours. We are outperforming those areas nationally, although it remains a challenge for us and an area for sustained and continued improvement. The national requirement is to reduce the number of delayed discharges to 34.6 per 100,000, and we currently sit at any one time, it varies from 30 to 50 in there, and there are lots of reasons why that would vary. So we are doing very well in that area. In terms of emergency admissions, I think we know that this is an area that we need to spend more focus on preventing admission, and with the geographical spread of our population, I think does contribute to that. But we've introduced, along with our acute colleagues, something called the frailty unit at Perth Royal Infirmary, and some of our IGB members were able to visit that in the last 6 months or so, and that's having an impact on enabling people not to be admitted to hospital or to be attended to in hospital for a very short period of time and returned home very quickly. So that's showing signs of success more recently. So hopefully in the report next year we'll see significant improvement in that area because of the way in which we're working together with our colleagues in acute services, with a real focus on our elderly, older and pretty frail population who would do better at home than a period of time in hospital. So I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Thank you very much. Next question to Councillor Robertson, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Can I ask about dental services? It says under dental services that the joint board will work with the Scottish Government and NHS Tayside to meet the increasing demands for emergency dental care for unregistered patients. We shouldn't have unregistered patients. Every person should be able to get access to a dentist. So I'm really puzzled by this, and we welcome your comments.
Jackie, please go ahead.
Thank you. The dental services, the public dental service that's delegated to the Perth North IJB is available to everyone who would meet the criteria for that. So it is very much focused on vulnerable patients and people of a certain age. So that's available for those who meet the criteria across the whole of Tayside, and we host that for Tayside. And you'll know that they have a base at Broxden. So in terms of the wider provision of dental services, that's not a matter for the Integration Joint Board, but certainly your concerns are echoed in our own deliberations and will feature in the discussions that we have locally and nationally.
Content.
The Broxden Dental Service does a great job, but it's just as a councillor, I get contact with people who are desperate to find an NHS dentist, and it seems a very hard thing to do. And you want to, it's really costly if people have got to get emergency treatment, even if it's on the NHS eventually. So I just think I'd appreciate it, Jackie, if you can use your best efforts to have this addressed by the Joint Board. I realise what you're saying about it's only vulnerable people that you're committed to helping, but I think people can easily become vulnerable if they're not given access to NHS dentistry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Certainly we'll take that forward as you described.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shires next for the next question, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question's page 9 of the Appendix 1 report, and it's about the feedback from people that use our services, and it talks about the survey being undertaken. People are selected at random from GP practice lists. My question was about how the kind of methodology that the survey questions are asked, given the demographics of the groups that are in there. Are they face-to-face surveys? Are they postal surveys? Are they, how are they conducted? Just given the type of people that are involved there.
I'll pass to Jackie for that, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Shires, for that question. I don't have that detail currently to hand, and I'm not sure if there's anyone else on the call who would have that, but I'm certainly happy to pursue that and come back to you and provide an answer to the committee on that in terms of the methods that are used to gauge opinion.
I think we do have others in the room. I think Chris, Charlie, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just to clarify, it was page 9 of the report in respect to the indicators 1 to 9, just to be clear. Yeah. So those indicators form part of the set of national indicators linked to the National Health and Wellbeing Outcomes. That is populated by a survey that's done every 2 years. The respondents are selected from GP practice lists at random and sent postally. And then gathered. It's a process organised and delivered by Public Health Scotland, and then we are effectively recipients of the results of that.
I think just to add to that, I was sampled into that this year, but declined to take part because I knew I'd be scrutinising the numbers. It is followed up by a person comes and knocks your door as well to follow up. However, I will put on record I was concerned about that survey because when it arrives in the post, it has materials alongside the survey that describe how brilliantly they did last time, which I worry adds bias to the data set. But I appreciate this is set at a national level, not a local level. We just get certain of the data, but it did give me that concern.
And do we have the opportunity to feed that back then, if that's been raised here now? I just was curious, given I know it says it's it's selected at random, etc. But if you're properly wanting to dig into the type of services that people are receiving, you want to do it as from a baseline as possible.
Would that be possible, Chris?
So yeah, just to come back, so the National Health and Care Experience Survey, as I say, is obviously done every 2 years for the purposes of populating these national indicators. Locally, we have a supplementary approach through the likes of Care Opinion, where we're able to gather feedback from people who we specifically know have accessed our services. They are effectively self-selecting at that point to provide a story of their experience, as well as some quantitative feedback around how they have particularly rated the services that they've received. So acknowledging that the Health and Care Experience Survey is only every 2 years, we have brought in different mechanisms to allow people to get that feedback to us on a more localised basis.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jackie.
Just to supplement that, and the way in which Care Opinion works, and some of you will have seen some of the monthly reports that we get. It's not closed questions that are asked of people. It's very much about they're able to report their entire experience, and that is responded to by the people who are delivering that service and engage in a dialogue around it. So it's not a closed question. And the way in which we analyse it, as you'll see, is really trying to understand the full breadth of that experience rather than a particular aspect of it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forbes for the next question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I should just say at the start, I found this report really interesting and incredibly easy to read. I particularly like the case examples because I think they give us a really human element to things that we do. But all of them seem to be really favourable, and I'm pretty confident we would have had some people when we spoke to them that weren't happy. Did we decide not to show any cases where things hadn't gone quite to plan?
Jackie?
Thanks very much, Councillor Forbes. No, that's not the case. What we try to do, and the process allows, is for that experience to be viewed across the board, so people could relate positive aspects of their experience, and at the same time say what didn't work so well for them. So that is certainly open to people. But I think it does beg a question around how care opinion is being used to, and people who are motivated to respond, and people who are motivated to respond are usually energised and pleased with their experience, or at the other end of the spectrum. So I think it does beg a question around that, but we are always open to hearing negative experiences, and that wouldn't be eliminated, and the process wouldn't allow that.
I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Vice Convener. I read the report as well. I didn't find it quite as easy as Mr. Forbes. I think you have to be invested in some of this stuff to understand it all, however. I would like to understand, if you can share with me, what are the 3 main challenges, and do we have plans to address them? I read the report, but I didn't actually pick out what are your main challenges. Is it recruitment? Is it an ageing population? I don't know. Can you help me, please?
Jackie, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's a great question and a great opportunity for opening further dialogue on this. I think our 3 main challenges in Perth and Kinross, firstly, relate to our ageing population and the increasing level of need, and our population projections demonstrating much higher levels of older people over the age of 85, and everything that comes with that in terms of health conditions for people who've been perhaps healthy all their lives, and what old age brings with that, including dementia. We're predicting a real increase in the proportion of people who experience dementia as well. So that is a significant challenge for us, because to deliver the care services that are required for that, with our current demographic, which is a falling population of working age and people who want to work in social care, that's our top 2 areas of concern. And the third is being able to deliver those services across such a huge geography, with the varying contexts in which we all know very well. So those are the top 3.
Okay, and then a question to the convener before I come to you, Councillor Forbes.
It was less a question, and maybe with my other hat as chair of the Integration Joint Board on, I think one of the other challenges is that we would like, as a board and as a health and social care partnership, to invest in early intervention and prevention and long-term thinking, in terms of improving people's overall general health, so that they, once they get into old age, we don't have the demand and the amount of need that we see. But you're then talking about investing for 15 or 20 years hence, rather than for a maximum of 3 years hence when we're dealing with a budget. And the budget's come through on on an annual basis, not even as we do in the council. Well, we set a 3-year provisional budget, but the money's coming through on an annual basis. So actual, setting aside a proportion of that for the long term, for the future benefit, to save, investing £1 now to save 15 or 20 pounds in 15 or 20 years time is a challenge that there just currently isn't the capacity for. But certainly I see that as one of the sort of longer term issues.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Vice Convener. This is a really easy to read report. I'm not going to start an argument over how easy or otherwise it is to read, but it clearly took the staff a huge amount of time, and we have to send this to the Scottish Government. So my question's a wider one about this and this kind of thing in general. Do we get feedback from the government? Do we think that they read it, analyse it, study it, give us constructive feedback and engage with us over it? Or do you think it just gets taken and stuck in a drawer somewhere?
Jackie Pepper on the specific of do we get feedback?
I hope it's not put in a drawer and stuck somewhere. But I suppose one of the positive things is that a number of our initiatives that have been taken forward are of national interest, and we've had a number of people contact us, and including Scottish Government. We've had a number of local authorities wanting to speak to us about our delayed discharge performance across the whole of Tayside. But for example, Scottish Borders were in touch through the national networks, and Scottish Government have been asking questions around the investment that has gone into supporting people with learning disabilities and our complex care transformation, and that we have performed very well in that area. So it's not feedback per se, Councillor Forbes, but more of a level of interest in those areas that are working well. And I think that we also have a real opportunity to have challenge at the Integration Joint Board from a range of professionals. And I've asked for this report to be considered by NHS Tayside Board, hopefully alongside the reports of both Angus and Dundee, where we can see where our shared challenges are, but also where we can learn from each other as well.
I'm pleased to hear that, Jackie. I had real concerns that you and your staff would do all this work, and it was really just to meet some obligation that the Scottish Government give us. So I'm pleased that we do get some feedback, and particularly pleased that other authorities are coming to us for advice on how they can improve as well. Thank you.
I have the Chief Exec wishing to come in on this. Thomas, please go ahead.
Thank you. Convener, Vice Convener. I just wanted to make a quick remark just in the back of Councillor Forbes' question, because there was on a meeting yesterday with colleagues across Scotland as part of the local government benchmarking framework. There's an exercise going on looking at the level of reporting that we are required to do as local government, and frankly it is enormous, the amount of reporting that we are required to do, not just in health and social care but across the piece. There's a piece of work that will be reported to COSLA leaders later on this year, just to show the complexity and the number of reports we are required to submit as part of the assurance regime that we work under. I think that's an incredibly important piece of work, and as and when it's available to leaders, I would encourage Council to consider that, and we will certainly be asking Government to consider the level of the regime that we're currently working within local government.
Great, thank you, Thomas. Next, Councillor Allen for a question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Thank you for the previous answers. They were great and they helped me understand it an awful lot better. I'm just going to go forward now in a general question and talk about doctors' practices are generally in trouble, but we do have C2 practices and they're staffed by locums, they're costly, there's no continuity of care. Will we have one of those in Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Jackie.
Thank you very much for that question. We don't have any at this point in time, but it's always something that is I mean, the fragility of our GP practices is something that is a real focus for us. There are 2 reports coming forward to the Integration Joint Board, giving an annual update on our primary care strategy and our premises strategy, and the work to support that across our GP practices in Perth and Kinross. So at this point in time, I would be hoping that we could avoid that, because we want to target our support for those practices most at risk, and particularly those branch surgeries which are reaching our more rural areas. So I can't predict the future, but it's something that we'd want to avoid, and that we are using our primary care services team and our strategic direction to support GP practices wherever possible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Smith for what looks like the final questions.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. My question is regarding any weaknesses that are found in the service. How do we report? We've got all the reports here about different things. This is done, that's done. But if we actually have picked up something and we've reported it, I think there should be something in the report to say this was lacking, and I don't think it's in there. And I can pick out a specific thing, which I'm not going to say here because it was personal, but nobody has ever come back and said, we've fixed that, we've got round it, nothing. So I would quite like a report to say that was a weakness, we are short of this particular people, but nothing in the report tells me about anything of that subject. Thank you.
Jackie, for a general answer to that, and maybe Councillor Smith, you might want to contact Jackie separately about the personal matter. Jackie.
Yes, thank you very much, and happy to have that contact directly, Councillor Smith. We'll take that feedback on board, but I suppose there's a variety of ways in which we can report the improvements that we're making, and directly to the Integration Joint Board, but through other reports as well. And but I'll certainly take that feedback on board. When it comes to clinical and care governance, and you'll know that you were about to move on to that report. So I can see that there is room for improvement in the way that we are reporting and giving you assurance about the changes that we're making. So we'll certainly take that on board.
Thank you, Jackie. That concludes questioning then. Would anyone wish to make comment against this report before we finish? Okay, that not being the case, it is recommended that Scrutiny Committee scrutinises and comments as appropriate on the Perth and Kinross Integration Joint Board Annual Performance Report. Is the committee happy that we have done that? Perfect, right, that concludes that paper. We will move then on to paper number 8, item number 8, which is the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership Clinical Care and Governance Report. I see actually though there's a request for comment from Councillor Massey. Presumably that's on the previous paper. Go ahead,
no,
Councillor
it
Massey.
wasn't. Vice Convener, it wasn't. It was on this paper. It just wouldn't go in. I don't know why it wouldn't. I kept on pressing enter and it just wouldn't go in before you asked. There was a comment on this paper, yes, the paper that was just been.
Yeah, please go ahead then.
Okay, thank you very much. My thanks go out to all those involved in bringing us this report. There's a great deal of information and statistics contained within the report, and it will take me some time to digest it all. The report highlights the wonderful work that the staff of the HSCP do for our communities, and this is echoed by the positive case studies and service user surveys, which show that users are very satisfied with the services they receive. As Perth and Kinross Council's Older Persons Champion, I'm pleased that we are now a member of the UK network of age-friendly communities. The improvement of 29% in delays discharge, the improvement in wait times for access to heart by 60%, the reduction of 20% on unmet need for care at home, all of these stats are encouraging and show that staff are motivated to helping our older people and wider communities, leading to healthier lives. Apologies for the noise in the background. That's my washing machine.
No worries at all. Thank you, Councillor Massey. So item 8 then, Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership Clinical Care and Governance Report. Before I hand over to Jackie Pepper to again introduce this report, just to remind members that this is a broader report, and in our role as elected members on Perth and Kinross Council, we're asked to focus our questioning on the aspects related to adult social work and social care. So please focus on those when and if you have questions. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. This is the Clinical and Care Governance Assurance Report for the period 1st of March to 30th of June 2024. You will know that there's a similar report considered by the Care Governance Committee of NHS Tayside Board before reporting on to the Integration Joint Board's Audit and Performance Committee. This is an integrated report, and notwithstanding the Vice Convener's comments, it is difficult to disaggregate some of the work that we do as we become more integrated in terms of our management and more integrated in our delivery of services. And the clinical and care governance arrangements are led by Hamish Dougal, the Clinical Director for the Health and Social Care Partnership, and Aaron Singh as the Chief Social Work Officer for the Council, reflecting that integrated approach that we take. It is clear that there's a bit of a lag in terms of the reporting, because just to do with committee timescales, etc. So there is some supplementary information within this report, particularly in relation to the two operational exceptions that are reported around allied health professionals and occupational therapy in particular, and to do with partnership premises, both of which have advanced significantly in the last few months or so. And I know that I'm joined, I think Aaron is still on the call, and Mark Dixon, who is the Clinical Care Governance Coordinator for the Health and Social Care Partnership, and happy to pick up on questions.
Thank you, Jackie, for the introduction and for the paper. Do we have any questions on this report? There being no questions and us being on the verge of lunch, I will move the paper then. Is the committee happy to note the report and the recommendation of assurance of reasonable assurance? Right. Anyone wishing to make comment? Okay, back to you then, Convener, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. So we've got 3 items left on the agenda: the update from the arm's length external organisations, the data protection compliance report, and the freedom of information performance report. We do only have the written reports. We are going to get the ALIOs back to the next meeting of the committee, which is in November. I'm going to propose that we hold over, therefore, any questioning of the ALIOs and also hold over the data protection compliance and freedom of information performance reports until the next meeting of the committee, if that's acceptable to everybody. As I say, we have had the written reports from the ALIOs. If anybody has any specific questions, do feel free to please feed those back through well, we can do it through committee services, and they can be passed on, and any answers to questions circulated to all members. But if the committee's content, I will call the meeting to a close there. Okay, thank you very much all for your attendance and for your participation, and to officers as well and to our partners earlier in the meeting for coming along and providing the reports and presentations and answering questions. The meeting's adjourned.